Orders of the day.
Orders of the day, government orders, government bills, commons. Resuming debate at second reading of Bill C9, an act to amend the Judges Act.
I believe we have the honourable member for Haldimand Norfolk up first.
I don't have a podium.
There you go. Maybe what I'll do is I'll just stand for a second and wait for the pages to get a podium for the honourable member. See this one? There we go. There you go, the honourable member for Haldimand Norfolk.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. It is my sincerest pleasure to be able to speak on this Bill C9, an act to amend the Judges Act today. As someone who's dedicated my life before politics to upholding Canada's justice system and to representing those who have been victimized, I would begin these remarks by expressing the necessity of our justice system to be transparent. This bill seeks to improve on the current judicial complaint process. It was more than 6 years ago, in 2016, that this government began the consultations on reforming the complaints process for judges. I must say that I question this government's priorities at this time, once again, that these reforms are not only now, Mr. Speaker, are these reforms coming to the floor after being introduced some 6 years ago. But I'm glad to see that this legislation is finally put forward. And I believe that with proper amendments at committee, it will make the complaints process that's inherent in this bill much stronger. The credibility of Canadian democracy and the institutions have been shaken over the last few years, Mr. Speaker. This is especially so since the onset of COVID and the profound encroachment that this government has had on the lives of the citizens, and almost at every turn. I've been deeply, deeply concerned, Mr. Speaker, about the declining state of our institutions and of our democracy. I'm concerned about the erosion of Canadian institutions, and I'm concerned that this has happened over the course of this Liberal administration. We've seen Canadians lose confidence and trust in their government, in healthcare authorities, in law enforcement, and in the media. Canada's justice system has also been tested greatly, Mr. Speaker. And during this time, its independence, its impartiality, its access, and its fairness have all been put into question. I know our system is not perfect, Mr. Speaker, and there are many issues that need to be addressed. But I must ensure that our legal system maintains the trust of Canadians, and that is part of my job as a legislator. We are fortunate that despite the Liberal government's many blunders, there's still some confidence in our system. Sadly, we see that with one hand, they are attempting to improve the rigor of the system by strengthening the judicial complaints process, while, on the other hand, they're undermining victims of crime by removing things like mandatory minimum sentences for the most violent offenses. It's imperative that we stand on guard and ensure that the pillars of our democracy are upheld, Mr. Speaker. It is imperative that we are always looking for ways to fix the weaknesses, to find the loopholes, and to strengthen the mechanisms that build trust accountability, transparency in our justice system. There are weaknesses in our justice system, and some of them have been exacerbated by this Liberal government. This long overdue bill is a step in the right direction. This bill highlights the need to fix the weaknesses in our justice system and to also strengthen the checks and balances around how central players of our justice system, like judges, are held to account when an allegation of misconduct arises. So what does this bill do, Mr. Speaker? As I mentioned, Bill C-9 proposes changes to the Judges Act to strengthen the judicial complaints process, which was first established 50 years ago, Mr. Speaker. The Judges Act regulates judges in a number of ways. It empowers the Canadian Judicial Council, the CJC, to investigate public complaints. Judges can also be investigated upon the referral from an Attorney General of Canada or a provincial Attorney General about any conduct that is within a federally appointed judge's purview. The Canadian Judicial Council has 41 members, including all Chief Justices and Associate Justices. Under the new process proposed, the bill, there are 4 reasons in the bill that judges may be removed, including infirmity, misconduct, failure in the due execution of judicial office, or the judge is in a position that a reasonable and fair-minded individual and informed observer would consider to be incompatible with the due execution of judicial office. The bill specifically states that a federally appointed judge may be removed from office if the judge's continuation in office would undermine public confidence in the impartiality, integrity, or independence of the judge, or in their office of such an extent to which would render the judge incapable of executing the functions of judicial office. Now I'd like to turn to the topic of fixing the system, Mr. Speaker. The Canadian Judicial Council has for years publicly lamented the fact that the current system is often enormously time-consuming, expensive, and taxing on federal courts. They have called for legislative reforms, Mr. Speaker, and such forms are necessary to maintain public confidence in the administration of justice. Mr. Speaker, this is the crux of the matter, maintaining public confidence in the administration of justice. And for that, there must be a deep trust and confidence, not only in the system, but in the administrators of the system, the judges who are counted on to dispense fair and impartial decisions based on evidence in accordance with law, and who would administrate and execute those duties with the utmost confidence in the system. The only way that public confidence is maintained, Mr. Speaker, is by ensuring there is a robust process by which judges themselves are held to account. If people lose confidence in the integrity of the judiciary, then the whole system unravels. I can tell you that as a trial lawyer and someone who has held my own practice, I had confidence appearing before judges. I knew that they were qualified, they would make sound decisions, and they were committed to the rule of law. But over the past 2 years, I have been approached by many individuals who are concerned, Mr. Speaker, about our system. They've asked me things like, how could a judge that ran for the Liberal Party sit and preside over a hearing, a bail hearing of somebody who was charged in the convoy and under the Emergencies Act? Mr. Speaker, these questions bring our administration of justice into disrepute, and they highlight the need to ensure that judges are not in a conflict, Mr. Speaker. So, in closing, Mr. Speaker, I I want to say that our system isn't perfect, but it aspires to apply the scales of justice to us all equally. It is logical to insist that judges be held to a higher standard than the average person, precisely because of the office they hold. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I'd like to just highlight the fact that by condemning the government on getting this legislation, I'm commending the government on getting this legislation to the floor. And I believe that if this legislation is put before committee, we could really hammer out some of the sections that need to be strengthened. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Question and commentaire. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, we have the Canadian Judicial Council, and through that, the council, they had I believe it was a semi-annual meeting. It was taking place in Alberta, I believe it was, and there was concern in regards to why the legislation wasn't kind of passing through. And there is a fairly robust legislative agenda that the government has. We've attempted to get Bill C9 through, ultimately having to go on to time allocation in order to get it through second reading. It still needs to go through the committee stage, not to mention the report and third reading. I'm wondering if the member can provide her thoughts in regards to responding to the need for passage, ultimately, of the legislation. Does she believe that the legislation should pass this year, or would the Conservative Party rather see it pass in 2023?
The Honourable Member for Haldeman Norfolk.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I take my job very, very seriously as a legislator. It is imperative that the people who elect us know that we are not just pushing bills through, that we are passing the best bills. And for that to happen, Mr. Speaker, it means that when we have time allocation, we use that time to make sure that we improve on the bill and that we put the best bill forward, Mr. Speaker. And that is what I endeavour to do. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Question and commentaire. L'honorable député de BTB.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi Bay James. I would like to thank my colleague for her speech. I think we have to respect the time for the process. I would like to talk about what happened in Val d'Or with the Justice Giroir. I'm very attuned to what happened. He was a Superior Court judge, and the time that this lasts, he was able to maintain his salary, and this is unthinkable. To think that even a judge would commit to the acts that he did, possibly selling cocaine. We have to avoid that this type of situation reproduces itself. We have to put an end to this process that takes too much time. It doesn't allow us to judge people accordingly.
The Honourable Member for Haldeman Norfolk.
Yes, thank my honourable colleague for that comment. It is very, very true that when a judge is charged with improprieties, Mr. Speaker, they should not be rewarded by having their salary, by having their pensions continue, especially such an egregious impropriety as alluded to by the honourable member. Mr. Speaker, it is my position that a part of this bill has to be the strengthening of the clauses that would take away this privilege from judges and also take away the frustration that they can appeal and appeal and appeal and use taxpayer dollars to frustrate the system when they've been charged with an offence.
Question and commentaire. Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for some of the comments today, and I think I heard that the Conservatives are interested in moving this forward to getting this to committee. So if I could just ask the member, Mr. Speaker, if they are committed to not slowing down, not frustrating this process and getting this to committee.
The Honourable Member for Haldeman Norfolk.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I take deep exception to anybody's comment that would think that I or my colleagues would slow down a process. I take my job very, very seriously as a legislator, and as I said before, this is something that is very important to me. I believe this bill is very, very important to the judicial system. I have been an officer of the court as a lawyer, and I think it's very, very important that we maintain integrity in the system, and so a rigorous application of this bill is necessary, and we would continue to do that to put the best bill forward.
We do have time for a quick one. I would say the honourable member for Niagara Falls.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague from Haldimand Norfolk for her excellent presentation. She talked about maintaining public confidence in our system. Perhaps you can further elaborate about public confidence in our justice system after 7 years of justice, of liberal policies that have kind of eroded the public's trust in our justice system.
The honourable member for Haldimand Norfolk.
Yes, I thank my honourable colleague for that very pertinent question. Mr. Speaker, there is a problem with public trust. As I said, as a lawyer, I appeared before judges, and I always had the confidence of knowing that these judges were impartial. But amongst Canadian citizens about the erosion of our institutions and in our system, and when we have violent offenders being released on the streets and frustrating the parole system, it really brings our administration of justice into disrepute.
Reprise de débat, continuing debate. The honourable member for Flamborough-Glanbrook.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my honourable colleague from Haldimand Norfolk raised some very good points and spoke about why this is very important to the judicial system and building integrity in the system. And my colleague from Niagara Falls raised the issue of public confidence in our justice system. And so I want to pick up on that point and talk about the fact that violent crime is up on our streets, and yet this government and its coalition partners have certainly shown to be soft on crime. And so I want to refer, as we talk about debate on this issue, to 3 articles that were in the Hamilton Spectator, the daily paper in my community. That just this week alone, 3 articles, and let me read the headlines, because I think it speaks to the fact that we really have a crime wave that's going on in our streets, and if we're going to talk about the judicial system, what's not in this bill, what we're not talking about, is the increase in violent crime, the increase in weapons, and those things that were watered down in C5 with the mandatory minimums that were watered down, and we need to really address that, because that's certainly what people in my community are asking about. So this was just on Wednesday. 2 teens charged and 1 suspect at large after a weekend shooting in Hess Village, which is a popular area for bars in the Hamilton area. And in this article, it refers to the fact that there were 32 shootings reported in Hamilton this year, 3 people killed. And so this is just one example. 2 days prior, on Monday of this week, loaded firearms seized at a Hamilton Mountain restaurant. So this is concerning to people in my community. Police arrested some suspects in this crime, but the fact that there are loaded firearms at restaurants in what are suburban communities, and the fact that people are afraid to go out as a result of these things is a concern, and that's not something that is really being addressed in changes to the judicial system under this government. Here's another one from Sunday. So again, this same week. So 3 articles in this week. Police are investigating gunshots following a disturbance on Hamilton Mountain. So officers say that this was in the parking lot of a housing complex. So here we have people that are living in these communities, and they're experiencing all of these increases in crime, and increases in gun crime, increases in violent crime. That is something that is not being addressed in this bill and isn't being addressed by this government. I know in another example, I don't have the article or the headline on it, but in my own community, or my own riding, the town of Bimbrook, which is really a small community of about 5,000 people. And recently in Bimbrook, there's been a number of car thefts, a number of home invasions. So imagine that you're in a bedroom community, you're fearful of home invasions in your community. This is a little further from the city, so police response is slow. So these are things that are of real concern to real people in our communities that aren't being addressed in changes to the justice system under this government. And so I think, the revolving door of crime that we're seeing is something that really needs to be more strongly addressed. I mean, I could throw out a number of different stats from the articles that I talked about. There's still 348 people that are wanted on outstanding charges. These include drugs, weapons, charges. Many are repeat offenders, so that's not being addressed in this. As well, our system is not perfect, and I think that's the point that's been made by my colleague from Haldimand Norfolk. But we do expect a higher standard of judges, and we do expect a response to these activities that are going on in our community that make people fearful to walk the streets. And we know that that is going on. We know that there's this increase in violent crime, and so how are we addressing the root causes of that and focusing in on that? And so let me just conclude, by echoing the comments made by my colleague that, again, it's not perfect. There are things in this bill that we support. There are some criticisms that she's proposed, and some criticisms that she's suggested, and obviously that'll be studied in committee. But my larger question really is, how are we helping people in our communities that are concerned about the increase in crime and not hearing any answers? Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
There you go. Questions and comments. Question commentaire. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Speaker, the principle of this particular bill is to ensure and continue to support the need for independence of our judicial system. It enables the process of looking at our judges and their performances to continue to be independent of politics. We're a country that's based on rule of law. There's a great expectation from stakeholders that this legislation will in fact pass through the system before the end of the year. And I posed this question to the previous speaker today. Because of time allocation, we're finally going to be able to get it out of second reading so that it goes to committee. What is the Conservative Party's position? And I guess I'm saying this, Mr. Speaker, so that the people in the back room will be able to inform whoever might be speaking that is the Conservative Party's intentions to ultimately see this bill pass in 2022, or would they rather see it pass in 2023?
The Honourable Member for Flamborough-Glenbrook.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the question. And as was pointed out in the question, there is time allocation on this, so we will be proceeding, obviously, with this today. We'll get to committee. And, obviously, aside from this bill, the larger question that the Conservative Party is asking is, what are we doing about violent crime on our streets? What are we doing about the fact that there's an opioid crisis? There's many issues that are not being dealt with. That's the real concern of everyday Canadians, like the people that I referred to in my communities, like the instances that were referred to in the articles that I presented. And so, that is really our question back: is when are you serious about crime in this country?
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The Honourable Member Kawartha. I'll get it eventually here. Peterborough. I know. I know Peterborough Kawartha.
We'll have to have you to our riding, Mr. Speaker, so
I know.
you never ever forget how wonderful Peterborough Kawartha is. Mr. Speaker, thank you to my honourable colleague for his speech. He brought up a really great point that I would love to learn more about. When we look at the rise of crime, we just had a municipal election in my riding, and the number one concern was the rise of crime. And the statistics of the same small number of people who were responsible for the majority of crime. And that has to do with bail reform. So this rinse and repeat of people who are doing crimes and then re-released. So they're doing the majority of the crimes, but they're let out on bail. So how important is bail reform versus Bill C-9? I would ask my honourable colleague.
I've lost it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would point out that Peterborough Kawartha is a beautiful area of Ontario in our country, and I would encourage yourself and all members of this House to visit Peterborough Kawartha at any time soon. Good question with regard to bail reform, and I think that's what I referred to with some of the instances that I pointed out to. There is this revolving door, and we're seeing at least in the one article, 2/3 of the charges with regard to repeat offenders. So there is that revolving door, and that's really what we think should be addressed is bail reform and some of the other aspects of what's contributing to the rise in crime and the rise in violent crime, in addition to what's being proposed here today.
We do have time for one more question. Une autre question. Question comment?
Another question. The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a very important bill, and I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. We're going to be supporting this bill because there are certain communities or sectors where a type of ecosystem where there's this kind of vigilante justice that goes on. I tabled a bill with regard to the toxic culture of sports last year, and it had to do with swimming. And we've seen this, with different sports in Ontario, allegations of sexual harassment, sexual abuse, and it's something that happens in camera, if you will. And so with regard to justice, I think we need an independent committee to deal with complaints. Would he not agree?
Thank you to my colleague from Longueuil-Saint-Hubert for his question. Also a beautiful area of the country that I would encourage people to visit. So that is a good question, and it's interesting that he uses the example of swimming. I was a lifeguard many years ago, going through high school and university, and swimming is a great sport, but his question was with regard to toxic culture in sports, and we've certainly seen that in other recent examples, Hockey Canada being one of them, of course, that's top of mind and recent. In terms of an independent inquiry, I will defer to my colleagues who are the respective shadow ministers for that file to comment on that specifically, but he, his point that there are these other issues with crime and with justice that need to be addressed and are not being addressed by this government and its coalition partner is valid, and we take that to heart.
Reprise du débat, continuing debate. The Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to rise here today and speak on this piece of legislation. Mr. Speaker, in my riding of Kelowna Lake Country, the impacts of crime and increasing crime rates is something that I've heard more and more about from my constituents. And according to a release from Statistics Canada earlier this year, the Kelowna Census Metropolitan Area, the CMA, now has the highest crime rate in Canada, with 27,147 criminal code violations in the region in the 2021 report. While the Crime Severity Index, the CSI, is 73.7 across Canada, according to Statistics Canada, in the Kelowna CMA, it's significantly higher at 122.3 in our region. It's the topic of discussion I hear from constituents in meetings and emails at coffee shops and on the streets, and it was one of the most important issues being discussed during our municipal election, which just ended a few weeks ago, with different solutions discussed on how to best solve this issue. One of the problems which arises from this is the revolving door we see in our criminal justice system. Now, unfortunately, too often we see individuals go through a catch and release system where they don't serve their time. They also don't receive the help they need to help reduce the chances for them reoffending, including addiction or mental health treatment. And these are all areas that we need to see improvement in our system on top of Bill C9. Unfortunately, in the conversations I've had in my community, there needs to be improvement in public confidence in our justice system. And there has not been much evidence that this Liberal government has helped to uphold this. Now, of course, Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, this is yet again another example of a bill which could have been in place almost a year ago if it weren't for the Liberal government's decision to hold an unnecessary snap election last fall. The previous iteration of this bill was S5 from the 43rd Parliament. It would have been debated, studied, and perhaps adopted by now if all members of this House moved it forward. But instead, here we are again starting debate on this bill from the beginning, over a year since the last version was introduced because of an unnecessary, costly election. And just as a reminder, Mr. Speaker, during that time when the snap election was called, ash was falling from the sky in my community of Kelowna Lake Country when the Prime Minister called this election. There are many examples of this scenario where there was legislation that was being worked on in the last Parliament, and due to the snap election being called, everything was cancelled, and then it had to start over again. And we're looking at a bill right now at the committee that I now sit on, which is Bill C-22, the Canada Disability Benefit, was also something which was first introduced over a year ago and then died on the order paper because of the snap election last fall. And so here's another example, Mr. Speaker, where, this government, we really have to look at what their priorities are. A lot of their priorities are political instead of moving forth good legislation that we need to in this country. Now, on this note as well, we've, Conservatives are always happy to work to have reforms in our judiciary. Public faith in our system is what guarantees our society's commitment to due process under law. And no one spoke more eloquently on this than former leader Rona Ambrose when she introduced her final piece of legislation in 2017, the JUST Act. And that bill proposed judicial accountability through sexual assault law training. And as a strong voice for women and sexual assault survivors, Ms. Ambrose introduced that far too often, or recognized that far too often our justice system fails to respect the experiences of victims of sexual assault. Sexual assault survivors need to know that those hearing their cases, have training, background, and context to give them a fair trial, and to better ensure that sexual assault survivors do not hesitate to come forward. We needed, and still unfortunately need, a judicial system that we can trust and that'll be fair, and that also a system that really focuses on victims. More work needs to be done to ensure that judges understand the laws surrounding this consent. More tools need to be provided to judges to provide fair, compassionate sentences that will see offenders rehabilitated. And Mr. Speaker, my own private member's bill legislation, which is Bill C-283, provides such a tool in reforming the sentencing process for offenders suffering from drug addiction and mental health challenges. My legislation would amend the Criminal Code of Canada to support a two-stream sentencing process. While both would have the same sentence time, certain convicted individuals who demonstrate a pattern of problematic substance use and meet certain parameters at the time of sentencing could have the judge offer them the choice to be sentenced to participate in a mental health assessment and an addiction treatment and inside a federal penitentiary while they serve out their sentence. Through this sentencing process, offenders would still receive meaningful consequences for their actions, but they would also receive curative treatment, leading to a path of reducing the risk of reoffending. In other words, end the revolving door. And my private member's bill, I've actually called it the End the Revolving Door Act. My bill has the support of many stakeholders who work in addiction treatment and in the criminal justice system. And it also has support across some party lines in this place, Mr. Speaker. And I'm thankful to say that we had our first debate on this, and it will be coming forth again. It's too important an opportunity to miss out, just like this bill that we have here today. And some victims have said that they have lost faith in the judicial system completely. And it was not too long ago that victims, especially women, were blamed for sexual assault. Now, before laws were put into place improving the process, it was common for judges to factor in things such as the length of a woman's skirt or whether she had a past relationship with the perpetrator. And this is something that, when determining if something was deemed criminal. So more accountability needs to be done in the judiciary. And it's so important, legislation is really important that involves our judicial system. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, we know that violent crime is up across Canada. It's up 32% since this government took office. And so, one has to wonder how, some of these soft on crime policies that this government has can impact Canadians' faith in their justice system as well as public safety. We also have to remember that the position of the federal ombudsman for victims of crime has repeatedly been left vacant by this government for many months at a time. And most recently, it was left vacant for almost a year. So these are things that are really important, Mr. Speaker, when we're looking at our entire judicial system, how it functions, and we need to focus on these types of issues so that the public has confidence, but also so that the public is best served in all of these different areas. It's also really important that at the core of everything that we keep victims in mind, that we're always standing up for the victims of crime. And that is something that the Conservatives absolutely do, and it's always something that we're considering and that we're focusing about. So, Mr. Speaker, in closing, if the Liberal government really was concerned about the issue that we're debating here today, Bill C-9, they would have, not called a snap election last year. This would have been already in place, and it's something that already would have been enacted. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Well done.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to be fair, as I've asked the previous speakers this morning on this legislation, recognizing in terms of the importance of the legislation, respecting the principle of judicial independence, and the fact that there's been stakeholders that are out there that are really hoping to see progress with this legislation. So far, the progress has only happened as a direct result of the government bringing in time allocation, which only takes it through second reading, concerns in regards to committee stage, third reading, and so forth. And the member made reference, Mr. Speaker, to the Senate, the fact that we've had this bill. The question is, before us, does the Conservative Party believe that this is legislation that they could actually get behind and support passage this year, or would they rather hold off until 2023?
The Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question from the member. Well, I mean, really, the calendar, the legislative calendar, is up to the government. The government chooses when they table legislation. They choose how many days of debate we have. So it really is their legislative calendar. We actually have our House Leader every Thursday, stand up and say what's coming up. What's next? What's on the agenda? So it's really up to the government to set the agenda. We do know that that this will be, that we're at the end of the debate here, and we're almost at completed in this part of the process, and then it will be moving into the Senate, and of course it'll be up to the Senate to decide their timelines and their processes on their side. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The Honourable Member for Simcoe Grey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for the fantastic speech today, the member from Kelowna Lake Country.
Great job,
I just was fortunate enough in my prior life to be the chair of the police board in my area, Nottawasaga Police Services, and I often heard many of the top brass and those first responders, the ones that were out there in the scene, that there was this huge frustration in the fact that what's been spoken about earlier, that there's repeat offenders and they become frustrated. Do you think that's hurt the morale of a lot of our officers in our areas because they know that a lot of the times this soft on crime isn't working?
That's a good question.
The honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague and the member for his question, and I also thank him for his service. Thank you very much for your service. Absolutely. It's unfortunately, if you look back in my community alone, it's a headline very often. We have some online news publications, and every day I open up the website, and there it is. There's another story. So it's this revolving door is occurring in all of our communities, including mine. I know that speaking to a number of first responders, and it's a number of first responders. Whether you're talking about law enforcement or firefighters, because they're quite often the first ones that are attending. They're attending issues that are quite often not even within what their normal roles are. Because of addiction and mental health issues. And then which can ultimately lead into crime. So they're overburdened, they're overworked, and it's really frustrating when you hear headlines that someone has been picked up 50, 60, 70, 100 times, and they're still just circulating through the system. We have to address this, Mr. Speaker.
Time for one more quick question. Questions and comments. Kawartha Lake Brock.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and thank you for the amazing speech from my colleague from British Columbia. She mentioned in her speech about victims, and I think that's something often overlooked, especially by this Liberal government. The victims are the one dealing with what has happened to them, the trauma, the feeling of being unsafe in their community, in their home, etc. And that's something that comes loud and clear. Maybe my colleague can expand on that, about the role the government should be playing to help the victims of crime.
The honourable member, Kelowna Lake Country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the great question. Absolutely, the victims have to be at the core of what we consider when we're looking at legislation. And a good example of that is Bill C-5. How the government is removing minimum sentences from very serious. Very, very serious crimes, and so what happens is it puts these individuals that have committed these crimes right back into their communities, right back into where the victims are, and that's one of the main reasons why we didn't support that piece of legislation was for that reason. We were looking for the victims and caring for the victims.
Good answer.
It's a debate, continuing debate. The honourable member for Saskatoon West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's once again my honor and pleasure to speak in this House on behalf of the citizens of Saskatoon West. And of course, I'm rising today to speak to this bill that's before us, C9, which makes changes to the way federally appointed judges can be removed for misconduct. Now, my approach today is a little bit different. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not well versed in how law works and all the details and technicalities of that. And actually, the best example of that is probably yesterday. I was privileged to attend the Justice Committee, and I was listening to some witnesses on the subject of C-28, and that's the extreme intoxication law. It's unbelievable that in this country, a person can get so drunk that they can commit a crime that is very that results in great harm to a person, and then they get off for it. There's no consequences, and that's exactly what happened. And that's why the government brought in C-28 earlier to fix this, supposedly to fix it. And so, as a lay person at the committee yesterday, I was listening to all of my learned colleagues ask very intelligent questions that I were kind of going over my head, and I was listening to professors explain the legal technicalities of everything. But one thing that did come out clear was that. First of all, it is absolutely wrong if a person commits a crime that they do not have consequences simply because they were too drunk. So clearly that needed to be fixed. But the more troubling thing that came across to me was that the government attempted to fix this law in a very hurried way earlier this year. and essentially ram through legislation to supposedly close a loophole. But what I heard yesterday was that what they rammed through in a big hurry without proper consultation, without actually talking to people about it, actually hasn't solved the problem. In fact, it may have made it worse. And so we need to be very careful in this House when we propose solutions and ram them through this House without the proper due diligence, because we can actually make things worse. And so that was the main thing I took away from yesterday. I also want to note another piece of legislation that is going through the House right now. It's S4, and it amends the process for peace officers to apply for and obtain a warrant using telecommunications rather than appearing in person. It expands the abilities for accused and offenders to appear remotely by audio conference and video conference. It allows prospective jurors in the jury selection process by video conference, etc. This is a bill that came about because of COVID, obviously. And so there were some changes that were needed in our system to accommodate more remote appearances, as you can see. What I find interesting here too was these changes were due to the COVID epidemic that we had, which was started 2 years ago. It's taken 2 years for the Liberal government to get this to the place of second reading here in this House. And so I find it odd that, on one hand, legislation gets rammed through instantaneously, almost like C-28. On the case of S4, it lollygags along for a while, and by the time it comes here, maybe COVID will be long in the rearview mirror when it finally gets passed. And so I just find it quite rich when the government talks about us obstructing things, us on the Conservative side, when in fact we are trying to do the proper due diligence and trying to make sure that we don't get bad laws. And so this brings me to C9, Mr. Speaker. This bill was originally introduced as a Senate Bill, S5, in 2021. The bill modifies the existing judicial review process by establishing a process for complaints serious enough to warrant removal from office, and another for offenses that would warrant other sanctions such as counseling, continuing education, and reprimands. And currently, if the misconduct is less serious, one Canadian Judicial Council member who conducts the initial review may negotiate with the judge for an appropriate remedy. The bill states that the reasons a judge could be removed from office include infirmity, misconduct, failure in the due executive of judicial office, and the judge is in a position that a reasonable, fair-minded, and informed observer would consider to be incompatible with the due execution of judicial officer. And a screening officer can dismiss complaints rather than referring them to the review panel should they seem frivolous or improper. So that's what that's about. Now, Mr. Speaker, federal judges are appointed for life. And it's absolutely critical that they're free of political interference. And so it's important that we have mechanisms in place to deal with them, to remove them from office if that extreme point is necessary. Parliament sets laws, though, and judges need to respect the will of Parliament. And a good example is the mandatory minimum sentences that the previous Conservative government brought in. First, any violent criminal, regardless of race, gender, and sexual orientation, should be treated as equal. The offender will face a jury of their peers, and if convicted, will get the appropriate punishment. Prison time will keep that person off the street, so they cannot engage in further criminal activity. Now, second, mental health issues, as well as drug and alcohol abuse, need to be addressed and monitored by trained personnel. Therapy and 12-step programs that are offered in prisons must be made mandatory for prisoners. Under house arrest, there's no way to ensure that these offenders get the help they need. Now, we also need to consider victim safety when we're sentencing offenders. The sad but real truth is that violent crime is often committed within a family. It can be spousal abuse, sexual exploitation of a child, custodial kidnapping, or robbery for the purposes of illicit substances. The people in closest proximity are always the most accessible victims. If a judge is required to sentence a spousal abuser to live at home rather than go to prison, what happens to the abused spouse and children? Do they flee to a crisis center while they get re-victimized? Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to talk a bit about Saskatoon and my riding of Saskatoon West. It's an awesome and beautiful place to live and work. My wife and I call it home. For years before I became the Member of Parliament, I was a home builder, and I built new homes for families moving into the riding. First as a candidate and now as an MP, I can say that I've knocked almost every door in Saskatoon West. And as I walk through those neighborhoods, I see some of the areas of highest crime. In the past year, there have been 389 cases of reported sexual violations in Saskatoon, 2,303 reported cases of assault, 65 reported cases of kidnapping, taking, abduction, and 759 cases of violation under the Controlled Drug Substances Act. Saskatoon is well above the National Crime Severity Index of 73.4 in Canada's largest cities, with a crime severity index of 118, and ranked fourth behind Lethbridge, Winnipeg, and Kelowna in 2020. Much of this crime is in areas actually right around my constituency office, Mr. Speaker. My constituency office is on the convergence of these neighborhoods, and according to the Saskatoon Police Services, is the highest crime area in Saskatoon. So as a result, we have to be very diligent in our office. We actually have gotten to know many of the people around that live in the neighborhood. They frequent our office, they frequent the area by our office, and we develop relationships with them. But my staff have a security door and a buzzer system in place to screen people before they can come into the office. But still, my office has been broken into and has had my House of Commons computers stolen. An employee of mine had his window broken into on his car just because somebody wanted a few quarters that were sitting in there. Now, a lot of this is because of addicts. We have a lot of addiction issues that are driving many of the crime problems that we have. And this is something that I agree with the government on. The approach on how to fix it, though, is where we differ. I believe in the miracles of alcohol and drug treatment through 12-step programs and abstention. The NDP Liberals believe in what's called harm reduction. What I think needs to happen is that the addicts need to be treated with love and compassion, such as what is offered through 12-step programs. These programs offer alcoholics and addicts a way to get clean and help others to get clean at no cost to the individual or the taxpayer. Unfortunately, there's two things that this government doesn't like. First, these are programs of spirituality. They require the addict to, quote, turn their will and lives over to the care of God. And two, as I explained, this does not require big government intervention. These programs deliver miracles. I know that for a fact. I know people who have been through them and care about them. And so, Mr. Speaker, as I wrap up, I just want to say that there are so many areas that we need to be working on in this House to improve our criminal justice system. This Bill C-9 is a good step forward. We need to make sure that our judges are independent and that they're worthy of the positions that they hold. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, you know, I find it interesting when the Conservatives talk about this whole issue of crime and how tough they want to be on crime. When I was an MLA back in the, let's say 2005, 2006, Manitoba had the highest number of car thefts per capita. And it was the same about 300 youth that were literally stealing thousands of cars. 15,000 cars, I think, was our peak. And that was when we had Stephen Harper as the Prime Minister. And I'm wondering if they can provide comment, as they like to say, how we've developed this revolving door, how they would respond to the fact that there was so much cars being stolen in the province of Manitoba, and would they take responsibility of that?
The Honourable Member for Saskatoon West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm actually a little disappointed that the Parliamentary Secretary didn't ask me the standard question that he's asked all of the other people that have talked. And I know I did speak to a little bit in my speech, but I do want to reiterate it because I really want to answer the question from him that he really wanted to ask me but couldn't. And that is to say that it is so important in this House when it comes to legislation that we don't ram legislation through, that we give it the proper due diligence, that when people have things to say, when honourable colleagues in this House have things to say, that they're respected and that they have their chance to say that. But more importantly, it's interesting how the government complains at this point that they had to invoke time allocation, when in fact they actually called an election to stop this legislation before. And so that we could have actually had this legislation passed had we not had a needless election a year ago that the Prime Minister called. So that was what I really wanted to say in response to his question that I know he wanted to ask. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire, l'honorable député de Longueuil-Saint-Hubert.
The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech, and I'd like to move on to a related topic, which is how sexual assault cases are dealt with. Women are still nervous about the court system, and in Quebec we have centers to help victims, and they collect statistics, and they say this: 7% of sexual crimes are reported to the police, so only 5% rather. So only 5% of sexual assault cases are reported, and that shows how nervous women are, how much they are wary of the court system. So very few cases get to the court system, and only 3 in 1,000 cases lead to a conviction. It makes no sense. What does my colleague think we can do about that? The Honourable Member for Saskatoon West.
I thank my colleague for that excellent question. I think really what it boils down to, the whole situation, is lack of confidence in the justice system. And when a victim is very unsure if the perpetrator will be held to account, and particularly unsure if that perpetrator will be ever incarcerated or have any consequences because of the actions, it's very difficult for victims to go through the mental anguish and the pain of going through a court process. And so I think that's exactly why we need to do everything we can in this House to solidify and improve our system. The current Liberal government has done the exact opposite. They have made it weaker. They have made it less responsible, and we are just going to see more and more people, victims, not wanting to come forward. And that's why we need a strong Conservative government to fix the mess that has been created in the judicial system by the Liberals.
We do have time for one more question. The Honourable Member for Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I was really shocked to hear my colleague here criticize harm reduction approaches for people that are struggling with addictions or people who use drugs recreationally. I actually had 5 people in my riding die from a toxic drug supply last weekend. It goes against what public health experts are saying in terms of the importance of putting in harm reduction to tackle addictions or to ensure people don't overdose. He mentioned a AA program, certainly that works for many, but suggesting that that is the way forward goes against science. And I know his party has difficulty following science, but perhaps I'm hoping my colleague can respond to me and perhaps evolve in his understanding of harm reduction.
We are out of time, but I'm going to let the member for Saskatoon West with a short answer.
I'm just happy that today I was able to shock the member for Winnipeg Centre.
There you go. Continuing debate. The Honourable Member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Here.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will be continuing after question period after a delay of about an hour, which is better than the situation I once had where I started a speech and then was delayed by a 2-week break. There is nothing like having 2 weeks between the first 2 minutes and the remaining 8 minutes of your speech to allow you to refine your remarks. And so the second half of the speech was considerably better than the first. But this time I'm going to turn it around. I'm going to put all the exciting stuff at the front end. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to talk about the legislative history of this bill, a bill that is so urgently important that the government is applying time allocation and limiting debate, a matter that is absolutely critical to get dealt with, which is presumably why the government has delayed debate from when it introduced the bill in December 2021 and didn't start debate for a further 6 months until June the 16th of this year. That's just shy of 6 months after it was introduced. No, in fact, it's exactly 6 months. Maybe they're seeking symmetry here. That was when debate at second reading started. Of course, you can't complete anything that fast. It then disappeared. It is now back in October, and they're announcing that it's a crisis. We must deal with this immediately, having delayed it. But the story is actually worse than that, Mr. Speaker, because the original bill was introduced in the Senate, Bill S3, and the government then put its own bill in. And even that misses the point that there was a previous bill that was essentially identical, introduced before the last election, the mid-COVID pandemic election, which caused everything on the order paper to be set aside. An election which served, as far as I can tell, literally no purpose, the least important election in Canadian history, which simply replicated the previous mandate down almost to the exact seat. So now it's a panic. Before we had literally years to deal with it, and I should point out this is dealing with an issue that is essentially 50 years old. I see the Speaker counting down. I will stop now, Mr. Speaker, and look forward to continuing after question period.
Thank the member for his intervention. He has 8 minutes when we return. Statements by members. Déclaration de député. The honourable member for Bonavista, Buren Trinity.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to speak of the reality most Canadians are currently facing. With the increased cost of groceries and other basic necessities, our government understands these concerns and has done a lot to provide critical relief to those most affected by global inflation. Last night, Bill C-31 was passed through the House, an act respecting the cost of living, relief measures related to dental care and rental housing. This bill will provide up to $1,300 a year for eligible families to access dental services, so that children 12 and under can receive regular cleanings and preventative services. As well, those who rent their homes will also get relief with the Canada Housing Benefit top-up payment of $500, which will see 1.8 million renters get help with the cost of housing. Mr. Speaker, I am very proud of the work our government has done to help Canadians, such as the Affordable Child Care Benefit and the recent GST top-up. And the passing of this bill will continue to help those most in need during these challenging times. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
I rise today to recognize a very talented young woman from Calgary, Prableen Kaur Garewal. She's a grade 12 student who plays with Kings 11 Field Hockey Club. She has been selected for Field Hockey Canada's Next Gen program. Prableen represented Alberta at U18 Nationals, where her team placed second, and she was given the Tournament 11 award at the National Championships. She quotes, "I am the first Punjabi girl to be chosen for both." She will also play with the Canadian senior women in the near future. I want to congratulate Prableen and her family for their accomplishments. In Calgary, field hockey has played a key role in building community and youth leadership. I want to congratulate the various field hockey clubs like Kings 11, United Hawks Club, and United Field Hockey Club for running very successful tournaments over the summer and their continued efforts to build a better future for our youth. Thank you to the coaches, organizers, parents, and players for doing their part to building strong community together. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Pierrefonds-Dollard. Mr. Speaker.
October 21, Emmanuel Christian School in Pierrefonds-Dollard held a walkathon against violence. The gathering honored Jason Collin, who at 26 tragically lost his life on August 10, 2022. Jason was an Emmanuel graduate. Jason was a victim of gun violence. Jason was deeply involved in his community. Jason was deeply loved. Let us recommit to creating communities that are safe from gun violence. Let us, as a society, address the root causes of violence. I commend Emmanuel Christian School for organizing this walkathon, for raising the voices in our community. Let us all take a stand against violence in all its forms. Continuons à étudier.
Let's continue to study and tackle the root causes of violence in our society. Jason, we owe you at least this much.
The honourable member for Windsor West.
Mr. Speaker, as October comes to an end, so does Cybersecurity Awareness Month in Canada. This year I have increased hope. With the help of cybersecurity and fraud awareness experts across Canada, including John Mercer and Kevin Cosgrove, we have worked to ensure fraud awareness is at the forefront of discussions. Our goal is to safeguard to educate Canadians against the attacks coming in at them from their computers, phones, and at their doorsteps. Alongside my colleagues in the Industry Committee, we just reviewed our report on fraud to hold the government accountable and make sure it's doing everything to fight fraudsters and to educate and protect the Canadians. I have hope because thanks to a historic U.S. settlement, some Canadian fraud victims had the opportunity to recuperate their losses to scammers when they used the wire transfers through Western Union. I have hope because the world is waking up to educating and protecting its citizens before they become victims. I am hopeful that all members in this House will work with me to educate Canadians on fraud and scams, and that the government will work with its global partners to advance the protections and protect Canadians at the international level. We can do better, and we must do better. I have hope we will unite and fight these scammers and organized criminals, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Vimy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in the House today to mark October 28th, Ohi Day. Ohi Day, or No Day, commemorates the Greeks who, in the beginning of World War II in 1940, rejected Mussolini's ultimatum demanding the occupation of Greece by the Italian fascist army allied with the Germans and the Japanese.
Resistance to fascist aggression. Unified Greek forces defeated and repelled the Italian invasion and, more importantly, drew Nazi Germany into the conflict, which undermined its invasion of Russia and Ukraine, a critical junction in the ultimate Allied victory. The day symbolizes the courage to stand up to defend one's home and freedom and confront the aggression of a much larger, richer country and military and prevail with the help of one's allies. 82 years later, Ohi Day's message is very relevant. Χρόνια πολλά Έλληνες, ζήτω 28 Οκτωβρίου 1940. Σας ευχαριστώ κύριε Πρόεδρε. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
The Honourable Member for Souris Moose Mountain.
Mr. Speaker, while the government sits back and watches Canadians struggle thanks to their lack of action on the just transition, I would like to highlight a group that is doing outstanding work surrounding the Liberals' phase-out of coal-fired power. South Saskatchewan Ready, an economic partnership that represents 9 communities, commissioned a feasibility study on the devastating impacts of the transition. Not only did that study recently win the 2022 Constantinos International Award Canadian Champion, it was also awarded the gold medal at the international level. All federal funding to assist this transition will end in March 2023, and the region stands to lose over $350 million in GDP and a 67% drop in population. Only 3% of the federal funding provided has been economic development, and combined with the Liberals' out-of-control inflation and cost of living, this will be the death knell of these communities. The government needs to stop pretending that their harmful, job-killing policies are actually taking meaningful steps to help the people of Southeast Saskatchewan.
The Honourable Member for Argenteuil-La Petite Nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Microbreweries Association of Canada presented the first ever Canada Beer Cup this past Sunday. This new national competition was designed to celebrate Canada's independent microbreweries that showcase quality and innovative craft beers from coast to coast to coast. I'm honored, Mr. Speaker, to have one of the great winners of this competition in my riding. Indeed, Brasseurs de Montebello won a gold medal for their Jack Rabbit beer. It's a black Pilsner, and they won a bronze medal for the Grand Feu beer, a smoked IPA, one of my favorites, Mr. Speaker. Congratulations to them. Microbreweries are an important economic driver for rural Canada, employing many employees and promoting local history and heritage. I am proud to be able to highlight their positive impact on our communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and long live beer. The Honourable Member for Orléans.
Spotlight the constituents of Orléans and the recipients of the Queen Jubilee Lapel, Kevin Frost. Kevin is a multi-sport world champion that has competed against able-bodied persons in all disciplines, and he has the gold medals and the world records to prove it. Kevin has competed in rowing, track, cycling, and golf. As we can all see, Kevin is quite the athlete. I would be remiss if I didn't divulge that Kevin is also blind and deaf. And despite these disabilities, Kevin has shown what can happen when someone appreciates what they have and uses it to move forward in accomplishing extraordinary feats. And don't take my word for it, take his. Kevin just announced the release of his book, Deaf Blind Champion, a true story of hope, inspiration, and excellence in sports and life, where he gave readers a front row seats into how his life changed when he received his diagnosis and what he did to persevere through depression that engulfed him to become an accomplished sportsman, father, life partner, son, brother, teammate, and activist. Congratulations, Kevin.
The Honourable Member from Beauce. Mr. Speaker, Canadians can no longer afford this costly NDP Liberal coalition. In Beauce, as in all of Canada, the demand on food banks is skyrocketing, over 20% in my riding. Food inflation is at 11.4%. We haven't seen this since Pierre Elliott Trudeau's days. Farmers across the country are finishing their crops and trying to meet the demand to feed our country and many others. The unwarranted 35% surcharge on fertilizer and the skyrocketing cost of fuel needed to plant, harvest, and dry grain have only made the situation worse. The government has done nothing to curb food inflation. Breakfast cereal is at 16.7%, bread is at 17%, and pasta is at 22.5%. Not only are they doing nothing, they want to triple the carbon tax, which will also have a direct impact on the cost of heating for many families this winter. One-time checks will not solve the problem. Canadians need a break, and they have suffered enough. A Conservative government will end these punitive taxes and finally put Canadians first.
The honourable member for Cloverdale Langley City.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Cloverdale Langley City is a wonderfully diverse riding with almost 70 Christian churches, a Muslim masala, 2 Sikh gurdwaras, a Hindu temple, a Buddhist temple, and more. I aim to connect regularly with all our faith leaders. I recently hosted a religious leaders roundtable with the United Churches of Langley. We discussed a wide range of topics. The faith leaders reiterated their respective communities' desire to help the government settle refugees fleeing dangerous situations. They also expressed concerns for our homeless and those affected by the opioid crises. Our community is fortunate to have such a compassionate group of leaders. I also had the chance to celebrate the Laurentian Leadership's, or LLC's, 20th anniversary. The LLC, formerly called the Booth House, is one of 24 designated National Historic Sites in Ottawa. I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Ann Penner, the Executive Director. As an affiliated program with Trinity Western University, I also appreciated seeing Dr. Mark Husbands, who was visiting from Langley. My intern, Lucy Chung, is a Trinity Western University student and a participant in this year's LLC program. Thank you to Lucy for her hard work during her placement in my office. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Regina, Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, people in Regina, Wascana and Canadians across the country are having trouble making their mortgage payments. This week, the Bank of Canada increased lending rates by 50 basis points. That was the 6th consecutive rate hike this year. With housing becoming less and less affordable, almost all Canadians are starting to worry about paying for the roofs over their heads. I say almost all Canadians because these difficult economic times seem to have gone unnoticed in the Prime Minister's office. On their trip to London, England last month, the Prime Minister's office managed to rack up $400,000 in hotel bills and other costs. This included one room in particular that cost $6,000 per night. Mr. Speaker, if this Prime Minister can't understand that Canadians are struggling, then Canadians need a new Prime Minister.
The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, once in every generation there is a game-changing invention, something that dramatically changes all of our lives and brings us from the past into the future. For us today, that invention is the ArriveCan app. For just $54 million, you can enter your name, your birth date, answer some questions, and upload some documents. This app actually has a mind of its own. It sometimes tells people to quarantine when they are fully vaccinated, not because it's supposed to, but it has an act of pure metaphysical voluntarism. Liberals say this act saved tens of thousands of lives. The app was so insulted by these lowball numbers that it made them all stay home for 14 days. Now, someone got very rich off this app. $54 million would allow you to spend 25 years in that $6,000 a night hotel. It would get you 85,000 gallons of the orange juice that in saner times brought down a cabinet minister. Canada has truly entered a brave new world where computers can make you stay home and where decide which civil servants get paid. I, for one, welcome our new robot overlords. They may be bad, but the humans in charge are even worse.
The honourable member for Vaudreuil-Soulanges. Our entrepreneurs and small businesses are the backbone of our economy. That's why the Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Vaudreuil-Soulanges is so important. Its objective is to support, connect, and defend the interests of its members in order to contribute to their success and economic development in Vaudreuil-Soulanges. I would like to thank the CCIVS for the work it does to support businesses in our community and has done so since its inception. I would like to welcome all the new elected directors. Congratulations to President Serge Ouellet, Vice President Mélanie Bossé, Treasurer Fanny Bradette, Secretary Pedro Lopez, and the Board of Directors comprised of Jean-François Blanchard, Josiane Farran, Philippe Roy, Luc Isabelle, Mathieu Janel, Éric Bellegarde, and Chloé Rousseau. I wish them good luck in continuing to serve our businesses and entrepreneurs. Together, we are building a more engaged, active, and prosperous community thanks to your work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cowichan-Malahat-Langford.
Mr. Speaker, not all MPs have motorcycle licenses, but I count myself to be fortunate to be one of them. During the beautiful, sunny, and hot day of Saturday, August the 6th, I joined with a couple hundred other riders for the first annual Vancouver Island Run for Homeless Vets, riding from Duncan to Langford. Now, I'll admit, most of the people on the run were not what I'd call your typical NDP supporter, and I was a little out of place with my dad's Kawasaki KLR 650 in the midst of all of those Harleys. But what united us that day, and which is something that I hold dear and goes beyond politics, was our common concern for the plight of homeless veterans, the men and women who faithfully served our country in uniform and now find themselves on the street. The funds raised that day were divided between Cockerell House, the Legion, and Homes for Heroes. And while I appreciate this effort, it underlines how much more the federal government must do. No veteran should be homeless.
Hear, hear. L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Manicouagan. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Bloc Québécois and my own little family, I would like to recognize World Stroke Day, which is held every year on October 29th. In Quebec alone, approximately 20,000 people suffer a stroke every year, and some 130,000 people who have had a stroke are living with physical effects that affect motor skills, communication, or even their emotions. Stroke can affect anyone, young and old, at any time in their life. My own family lives with the consequences of this illness on a daily basis. My youngest son, Ulysse, suffered a stroke at the very moment of his birth. I would therefore like to extend my warmest thanks to all of the people who work in prevention and treatment of strokes, who give time, money, and love to help us live better, healthier, and longer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Mr. Speaker, what we are seeing unfold is a disturbing trend from this Liberal government, and particularly the Minister of Emergency Preparedness, where Canada's independent police forces are being politicized to promote the Liberals' agenda. It started with evidence from the April 28th call with RCMP Commissioner Lucky, where the Commissioner admits that she received a request from the Minister's office and that she was working directly with the Minister and Prime Minister to release confidential information that could jeopardize an investigation, all to promote the Liberals' soon-to-be-released gun control legislation. Now we learn from text messages released to the Public Order Emergency Commission that Commissioner Lucky asked OPP Commissioner Thomas Karike whether the Minister of Emergency Preparedness had reached out to seek a letter of support for the Liberals' use of the Emergencies Act, days after it was invoked. Commissioner Lucky even sought to use a messenger app that would prevent investigators from recovering deleted messages. Clearly, she has something to hide. The RCMP Commissioner and the Liberal government are hiding the truth from Canadians. When will they finally come clean?
The honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Mr. Speaker, the importance of local journalism was on full display this week as we saw the vital role it played in our Ontario municipal elections. Leading up to and on Election Day, our community turned to our trusted local journalists for information on local candidates, important issues, and election results. In Kitchener-Conestoga, we relied on local news outlets like the Woolwich Observer, New Hamburg Independent, Kitchener Citizen, Waterloo Region Record, and the Wilmot-Tavistock Gazette. All trusted and credible news organizations delivering essential information to us day after day. Our community newspapers are struggling as tech giants benefit from online advertising revenue while displaying local news content for free. This is an issue about fairness. Tech giants must pay for the news content that they use. I'll continue to advocate for supports to local news outlets, including working on legislation that will require tech giants to fairly compensate news publishers and journalists. And I will always support quality, fact-based, independent, local Canadian journalism. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral questions, question orale. The honourable member for Regina Capel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister told Canadians not to worry about his massive deficits and borrowing and spending because he said interest rates would stay low for a very long time. Then he turned around and pumped $400 billion into Canada's banking system, causing prices to rise. Now, to fight inflation that the Liberals caused, the Bank of Canada has again jacked up interest rates. And for the average mortgage in Vancouver, that means families will have to find another $1,900 a month just to stay in their own homes. Wow. So, has the government been briefed on how many Canadians will have to turn their keys over to the bank as they struggle to pay these rising mortgage costs?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, we've put a fiscally responsible affordability plan on the table in this House, and it'll be my pleasure to answer questions on the economy today. But, Mr. Speaker, the new Conservative leader hasn't answered a single question from journalists in nearly 50 days, Mr. Speaker. Canadians don't have the luxury of doing some of their job and not other aspects of their job. So if the new Conservative leader would like to take home his full paycheck paid for by the Canadian taxpayer, he needs to answer questions from journalists in the press gallery today.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister hasn't answered a question in this House in 7 years. And we're here answering questions on behalf of Canadians who are struggling to pay their mortgage costs just to stay in their own homes. The typical family in Hamilton who now has to renew their mortgage payments will have to come up with an extra $1,300 a month just to stay in the home that they've already been living in. The Prime Minister said that he was going to go into debt so that Canadians didn't have to. So where should families in Hamilton send the bill for their higher mortgage costs?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, families in Hamilton and right across the country will receive in a few days a doubling of the GST tax credit, Mr. Speaker. And this feigned compassion from the Conservatives opposite, the day after they vote against providing supports to Canadians in the form of direct payments for those Canadians having trouble paying the rent, the day after they voted against subsidizing dental care for Canadian children, Mr. Speaker, this feigned compassion from the Conservatives is fooling no one.
Well done. The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
What we're against, Mr. Speaker, are the inflationary deficits that this government is causing. The reasons why prices are going up today is because the government flooded the banking system with $400 billion of brand new cash. And now Canadians have to pay for it. Again, a typical family, these are based on modest estimates from the Canadian Real Estate Association. A typical family in Ottawa will have to come up with an extra $1,000 a month when they go to renew their mortgage. So once again, has the government been briefed on how many Canadian families are going to lose their home because of the Liberal-caused inflation?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, once again, the Conservatives don't seem to understand that while the prices of things continue to rise in Canada, we need to be there to support Canadians. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are seeing higher prices at the grocery stores, and that is why we doubled the GST tax credit. That is why the Competition Bureau is currently beginning the investigation process into the market. That is why supermarkets across this country have frozen their prices, while the Conservatives are working on their next gimmicky lines. Mr. Speaker, we are serious about a serious issue in this country, and we're taking real action.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-l'Érable. Mr. Speaker, there are people who are unable to buy groceries at the end of the month. There are people who are paying $800 more per month for their mortgage payments, Mr. Speaker. That's not a gimmicky line. It's about the livelihood of Canadians because, Mr. Speaker, this government has spent billions of dollars. It has created inflation. It has increased interest rates, which means that now every single Canadian is having trouble. Mr. Speaker, how many families are going to have to go bankrupt because of this NDP Liberal coalition? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, it's been barely 12 hours since the Conservatives voted against a measure to put more money in the pockets of Canadians. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives' economic plan is to rob our pensions, is to attack the EI system in this country, and the Conservatives don't have Canadians' interests at heart. The Honourable Member from Mégantic-Lérable. Mr. Speaker, since the beginning of the question period, the Parliamentary Secretary has not once answered the questions we have been asking her. That is, how many families will be bankrupt at the end of the month because of the inflationary policies of this NDP Liberal coalition. These families are not able to pay their mortgages at the end of the month. In Montreal, for an average family, we're talking about $800 more per mortgage payment every single month on a house that is worth $500,000. Mr. Speaker, through you, how many Canadians are going to have to turn in their keys because of the inflationary policies of this government? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, we said in this House that we wanted to cut taxes for low-income families. The Conservatives voted against that. When we moved the Canada Child Benefit, which puts more than $13,000 in the pockets of lone parents, the Conservatives voted against it. And yesterday they voted against additional measures to help Canadian households. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives need to look in the mirror and realize that they don't have the interests of Canadians at heart. The Honourable Member for Manicouagan. Mr. Speaker, another day at the Public Order Emergency Commission and more evidence that the police forces did not want the Emergencies Act. A text message exchange between the RCMP commissioner and her OPP counterpart reveals that on February 5th, the police forces were already worried about the federal government's plans. This is what the RCMP commissioner said about the Emergencies Act. This is not something that I want. So why did the government invoke the most extreme of all Canadian statutes against the will of the RCMP? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we invoked the Emergencies Act because it was a decision that needed to be made. It was to protect Canadians' health and safety. And what the testimony has showed is that there were challenges around the disturbances that were affecting workers, families, vulnerable Ottawans, and that is why we invoked the Emergencies Act, and we're going to collaborate with the Commission. The Honourable Member for Manicouagan. Mr. Speaker, the Commissioner's text messages also showed that during the very first week of the occupation in Ottawa, on February 5th, the federal government was already considering invoking the Emergencies Act. But on February 5th, the blockade of the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor hadn't even happened. That started on the 7th. So when the federal government claims that it had to invoke the Emergencies Act because it was a national crisis, that is simply untrue. Mr. Speaker, the Emergencies Act had never been invoked because it's supposed to be a statute of last resort. So why did the government use it as a first resort and against the will of the police forces? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, with all due respect for my colleague, the decision to invoke the Emergencies Act was a last resort. And that is exactly what the testimony before the Commission has been showing. There were many negative impacts on workers, on families, and on vulnerable Ottawa residents, including not just in Ottawa but in Windsor. So we invoked the Emergencies Act because it was an unprecedented situation and it was necessary.
Premier Danielle Smith is once again attacking public health care in Alberta, stating that she will pull Alberta out of federal programs she doesn't like and pushing an American-style private health care system, a system that will not help anyone but the wealthy.
I'm just wondering relevance on the question on public administration. So maybe we'll just allow the member to maybe rephrase it in somewhat that has to do with government orders. The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Conservative Premier Danielle Smith is yet again threatening Alberta's public health care system, stating that she will pull Alberta out of federal programs she doesn't like. Federal programs like the Canadian Health Act. And to make matters worse, the federal government is doing nothing to stand up for Canadians' fundamental right to health care. When is the government going to step up and protect Albertans from conservative attacks on our universally accessible, publicly delivered health care system?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for the question, and I join with her in believing that our publicly funded, cherished healthcare system is part of the identity of being Canadian. The Canada Health Act is very clear. There are the 5 provisions that have to be seen in order to have a transfer. So I hope that the Premier listens to us when we meet in 2 weeks in Vancouver, and that her colleagues will let her know how important the Canada Health Act is to all Canadians.
Order. Thank you. The honourable member for Vancouver East.
Under the Harper government, the cost of buying a home increased by 77%. It doubled under the Liberals. The average rent in Canada is now over $2,000 a month. Families just can't afford it. Both Conservatives and Liberals allow for the financialization of housing to go unchecked, treating housing as a stock market instead of a necessity by allowing corporate landlords to evict people from their home to turn a profit. Canadians deserve to find a home that they can afford. Will the Liberals stand with Canadian families and put a stop to the profiteering of housing?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je remercie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for her question. And yes, we can see that currently speculation is raging on the housing market, and that's why the government put in place a bill to ensure that a 1% tax on residential properties belonging to non-Canadians will be put in place because we want to ensure that we are protecting our market here in Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Peterborough Kawartha.
1.47 million. That's the number of Canadians who accessed a food bank in 1 month. Wow. The highest number in history ever. 1 in 3 of those users are children. And what's the Liberals' plan for relief? More tax. They want to triple the carbon tax on groceries, triple the carbon tax on home heating, triple the carbon tax on gas. Will they commit to ending their triple carbon tax increase, or do they want more Canadians using a food bank?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for raising a very important issue. This is a matter that should concern every member of this House and actually concern all Canadians. The fact that she said that families are struggling, feeding their family, but also kids, is something that is of concern to all of us. That's why, Mr. Speaker, back in May, I asked the Competition Bureau to look at the issue that we're seeing around competition in the country, and more recently asked them to launch an investigation to make sure there's no unlawful practice. But in addition to that, Mr. Speaker, I did speak to the number of CEOs around the country to make sure they do their part to lower prices for Canadians.
The honourable member for Peterborough Kawartha.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the member's attempt to answer the question, but that's not an answer for why we have $1 trillion debt. It's not an answer when we have an increase in carbon tax, when 4 million Canadians rely on propane and oil to heat their home. This is not a luxury. This is a necessity. The average family is going to pay $7,000 to heat their home this winter. They have to choose between heating and eating. So again, I ask, will the Liberals finally show leadership, fiscal responsibility and compassion and stop the tripling of their carbon tax?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to quote from an article that the new Director of Communications for the Conservative Party of Canada wrote, and he said, but opposition to a policy is not a policy in and of itself. And he added, Conservatives are refusing to contribute anything to the climate change discussion other than throwing temper tantrums and scoring political points. Mr. Speaker, I agree with the new Director of Communications for the Conservative Party of Canada.
The honourable member for Parry Sound Muskoka.
Mr. Speaker, the NDP Liberal coalition has racked up over $500 billion in inflation-causing deficits, turning essentials like heating our home and eating healthy food into luxuries. Just as Canadians are starting to pay the high skyrocketing price to fuel their homes, skyrocketing visits to food banks are happening in Canada as well. When will this costly coalition stop hurting Canadians and cancel their inflationary spending?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Yeah, we would all agree that our colleague is bringing an important issue. We are all seized by the fact that the price of food in this country has been increasing. Mr. Speaker, that's why we took action. Earlier this year, I asked the Competition Bureau to look whether there would be any unlawful practice in this country. More recently, I demanded that they start an investigation to make sure that we monitor what's going on in the market. But more recently, Mr. Speaker, what matters to Canadians, we took action. I did speak to CEOs of the large grocery chains in this country to make sure they lower prices for Canadians, because this is a matter that everyone should do their part to lower prices for families.
Member for Parry Sound Muskoka.
I cannot believe how tone-deaf that answer. He's talking about cell phone bills when people can't afford to eat and heat their homes. This coalition would have people believe that more inflation-causing borrowing to give Canadians $500 to help them pay for thousands more dollars in groceries, thousands more dollars for heating their homes, and thousands more to pay their mortgage is actually a solution. It's like the left hand doesn't know what the far left hand is doing. How many Canadians have to lose their homes before they get it and cancel their inflation-causing borrowing?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, maybe my English is not so good, but one thing that I'd say is I did speak to CEOs, the CEOs of the grocery chain in this country, Mr. Speaker. I did speak also to the telcos, actually, to make sure that we would reduce prices for Canadians should this merger go forward. But, Mr. Speaker, beyond that, this is not a political issue, Mr. Speaker. We are concerned, they are concerned, every Canadian is concerned. What matters to Canadians, Mr. Speaker, is that we all do our parts. We ask the grocers to do their part. We ask the producers to do their part. And I've even called upon the companies who have increased prices at the time that Canadian families are struggling. We'll fight for Canadians at every step of the way.
The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, this government's inflationary choices are forcing Canadians to tighten their belts. The increase in the expenses of an average Canadian family with a $400,000 mortgage up to 5.5% mean they'll have to pay $20,000 more this year. Mr. Speaker, will the government give Canadians some breathing room? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, I agree with my Conservative colleague that Canadian households are having trouble, and that is why we doubled the GST tax credit for 11 million Canadian households. And that is also why we voted in favour on this side of the House for measures that will put more money into Canadian families' pockets. Mr. Speaker, I still don't understand how the Conservatives can rise in this place and say that Canadians need our help, whereas they vote against the measures we put forward. The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are not calling for a partisan response. They're calling for action. Mortgages are up, gas is up, groceries are up, heating prices are up, and everything is up. Mr. Speaker, will the Liberal government pledge to not increase the taxes of all Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, I think that my colleague is getting all excited because next week we're going to unveil our economic update. And, Mr. Speaker, that update is going to be fiscally responsible. We have one of the lowest deficits in the world, Mr. Speaker. We're talking about 1%. We were fiscally responsible in our April budget, and we will be as well in our update, and we'll be there for Canadians to help them weather this period of instability. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Repentigny. Mr. Speaker, the UN this year published another scathing report on climate change. It put together all the plans of all countries to fight climate change, and it shows that we are very far from our 1.5 degrees target. The minimum rise will be 2.5 degrees, and that's only if the countries respect their plans. But Canada has just announced in Washington that it's going to accelerate gas projects to export more to Europe. Does the minister realize that when the UN is asking for climate change cuts, not increases? The Honourable Minister. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank my colleague for her question. Now, I'm quite confused by her question because the leader of her party said in an article on Radio-Canada that the environmentalists in Quebec are angry at the leader because he questions climate change. And so we believe in the climate change science, and we have taken serious measures to fight climate change. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Repentigny. I don't think the minister understood my question because I was talking about oil. The minister was on Les Coulisses du Pouvoir Sunday, and he was questioned about Canada's plan, which was announced in Washington, to expedite oil and gas projects. The minister could have said, to be clear, that no, Canada would never do that in the midst of a climate crisis. But on the contrary, he explained how he, as an environment minister, could advise oil and gas companies to help them to get through the assessment process more quickly. Now, how many other oil projects is he planning to approve? The Honourable Environment Minister. Mr. Speaker, the leader of the Québécois, when he was Minister of Environment in Quebec, sidestepped environmental assessments on the project in Gaspésie. He circumvented the environmental assessment on Line 9 in Enbridge, and he sidestepped his own law, Mr. Speaker, when he is Environment Minister in Quebec on drilling in Anticosti. So I think the Bloc Québécois doesn't need to teach anyone lessons on that.
The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan.
So I thought the Prime Minister loved vacations, whether it's visiting the Taj Mahal, flying to private islands, surfing on Truth and Reconciliation Day, or spending $6,000 a night on a hotel room in London. But at the same time, his overpriced Arrive scam app kneecapped Canadian tourism, and now he's forcing Canadians to cancel a visit to Grandma or a trip across town by tripling the carbon tax. How is it fair for the costly coalition to overtax and block travel by Canadians while continuing to fund the Prime Minister's extravagance?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, throughout the pandemic, this government put in place the measures that were necessary to protect the health and safety of Canadians. We made sure that we introduced CERB. We made sure that we introduced wage subsidies. We made sure that we introduced rent subsidies to keep businesses alive, to make sure that we could protect workers. And yes, and at the border, we also put in place the measures that were necessary to facilitate travel, to keep our economy going, and that include Arrive Can to protect the health and safety of those travelers who are coming into Canada. Mr. Speaker, we will always use evidence, science, and medicine as the bedrock of our decisions, while Conservatives fight a war against it every day.
Member for Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, they also made sure they found a hotel in London that cost $6,000 a night. I'm seriously trying to imagine what you could get for $6,000 a night. It must have been a just incredible time. Did champagne come out of the faucet, or was he busy planning his leadership campaign? Did the bill include the cost of bail for the Minister of the Environment? I'm sure it was such a wild time that Bill Morneau could have written a whole book about it. Could the House know once and for all, if any sleeping took place, who slept in the $6,000 a night hotel room?
The Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Mr. Speaker, the official Canadian delegation to the Queen's funeral included the Governor-General and former Prime Ministers. All members of the official delegation, including 2 Conservative Prime Ministers, stayed at the same hotel that could accommodate its size during extremely high demand. As always, Mr. Speaker, our government made every effort to ensure that spending on official trips is responsible and transparent. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Stormont Dundas South Glengarry.
Mr. Speaker, this morning in a stunning decision, the Supreme Court of Canada has struck down a criminal code requirement that sex offenders be automatically added to the sex offender registry. This should terrify every woman, every victim of sexual assault, and every parent in this country. We cannot spare a moment to fix this massive public safety issue. What will the Liberals do to guarantee that every single sex offender is always on the National Sex Offender Registry?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question. Obviously, we as a government stand in support of survivors of sexual assault, sexual violence, and it is important that our criminal justice system treat and punish offenders in the system. We have the Supreme Court decision this morning. It is complex. There are a couple of different aspects to it, Mr. Speaker. We are looking at it carefully, and we're looking at options in terms of how to move forward.
The honourable member for Stormont Dundas South Glengarry.
Any woman, any victim of a sexual assault, and every parent in this country should be very concerned about that lack of a definitive statement to say we are going to guarantee that every single sex offender in this country is always automatically listed on the sex offender registry. Absolutely. That should be a given, and that should be an easy statement for the minister to commit to this House to fix this problem immediately. I will ask again, what will he do and these Liberals do to ensure that every single sex offender, repeat or not, is always on the sex offender registry? This should be a given.
Yeah. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, last spring, when it was a question of the extreme intoxication defence, I moved immediately to make sure that we had legislation in this House to fix that gap. Mr. Speaker, these are complex issues. The decision came down this morning. There are a number of different important and different aspects to the decision. We will support victims, Mr. Speaker. We will look at the possible options that we have moving forward, and we will move forward, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Mr. Speaker, at record rates, families are being forced to turn to food banks because they just can't keep up with rising food prices. People are angry that their wages stay the same while rich CEOs are driving up costs to make millions. The Liberals have a responsibility to support Canadians. Instead, they've let CEOs hide their massive profits behind inflation. When will the Liberals tackle corporate greed in the grocery sector to help families with their food bills?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, there are a number of measures in our budget that will ensure that everyone pays their fair share in this economy, but I do agree with the member opposite that Canadians are seeing higher prices at the grocery store, which is why our government took action, Mr. Speaker. In addition to doubling the GST tax credit for 11 million households in this country, Mr. Speaker, the Competition Bureau has indicated that it will take action thanks to the demands of this government. As well, Mr. Speaker, thanks again to the actions of our government, supermarkets, many of them across this country, will be freezing and have already, in some cases, frozen prices at the cash register, Mr. Speaker. These are measures that will support Canadians.
Honourable member for Hamilton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, it was thanks to the demands of the NDP, and while Canadians struggle to put food on their table, grocery giants are picking their pockets in order to line their own for Bay Street. In the first 2 quarters of 2022, grocery stores made an average of $1.5 billion while workers' wages stayed the same. That's twice as much as the pre-pandemic profits, and this year, food bank use rose to the highest levels in Canadian history, and yet rich CEOs keep cashing in. It's despicable. Yep. When will this Liberal government curb the appetite of corporate greed so that Canadians don't have to continue to go home hungry?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Industry.
Mr. Mr. Speaker, we share the indignation of my colleague on the other side. Obviously, we all want to do our part, obviously, to bring the price down for Canadians. But the difference, Mr. Speaker, is on this side of the House, we took action to make that happen. The first thing I did, Mr. Speaker, is back a few months ago, we did ask the Competition Bureau to look at unlawful practice in the sector. And more recently, my colleague would remember, I did write to the Competition Bureau to ask them to start an investigation. But in addition to that, I called the CEOs themselves and I asked them, do your part for Canadians. Canadian families are hurting. You need to do your part. CEOs are doing their part. We're doing our part. Why don't all members do their part to bring price downs to Canadians?
The honourable member for Whitby.
Mr. Speaker, at a time when the rules-based international order and democracy is threatened, the relation with our American counterparts is more important than ever. This week, the Minister of Foreign Affairs announced the first official visit to Canada by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Could the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs inform this House of the importance of this visit for Canada-U.S. relations?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank my colleague from Whitby for his work and important question. More than ever, Canada and the United States are united as allies, partners, and friends. During this important visit, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Secretary Blinken had the occasion to discuss the crisis in Haiti, the situation in Iran, the Arctic, investing in the Indo-Pacific, our continued collaboration on holding Russia accountable for its illegal invasion of Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to face the world challenges together with one of our most important allies.
The honourable member for Calgary Centre.
Mr. Speaker, in August, Germany's leaders came to Canada begging us to help offset their dependence on Russian gas. Our Prime Minister replied, there is no business case for Canadian LNG. Au contraire, refuted Canada's actual business leaders. The opportunity for tens of thousands of Canadian jobs is quite clear. With the world demanding Canadian energy, why is this Prime Minister berating Canada's clear opportunity?
Great. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, Canada is committed to tackling the concurrent crises of global energy security and climate change, but we will do so in a manner that accounts for and works to minimize domestic emissions and do so in a manner that ensures any resulting emissions fit within Canada's climate plan. LNG is one of the tools in our toolbox, and our government is committed to supporting the development of the LNG sector. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Calgary Centre.
Well, that doesn't seem quite true. Coal experts from Russia have reached peak levels. China has also reached peak levels and gone up 300 million tons of coal production this year. Europe is cranking up coal plants. Why? Because the LNG that Canada could have supplied has been held up by this government's policies. Canadian LNG has a carbon footprint half that of the coal that's ramping up around the world. When will this government get out of the way and provide the planet with the carbon emission fuel we need to decarbonize?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, I find it a bit rich to hear the member opposite talk about foreign oil imports. There was twice as more foreign oil imports under their leadership than today. So when they say they have the back of energy workers, the question is, which energy workers, Mr. Speaker? Saudi Arabia energy workers, Russian energy workers, or Canadian energy workers? Because under our leadership, oil exports have gone down by 50%, Mr. Speaker, and imports in investment in renewable energy and clean technologies have doubled since 2015. I think we have no lessons to receive from the member opposite on energy, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, it is disgusting. The NDP Liberals have not learned their lesson. They continue on this dangerous crusade to shut down Canada's oil and gas sector, something that is not only economically disastrous, but is dangerous for our world and bad for the environment, and puts my constituents as well as oil and gas workers from every province in the country out of work. Will this minister put an end to his activism and let Canada's oil and gas workers deliver the energy that this world needs?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, when we're talking about transition, we're not only talking about the future of the industry and sustainable jobs, we're talking about economic opportunities for communities across our country. Those enormous economic opportunities will be enabled through the transition to a low-carbon future. Those opportunities will vary by region. They are particularly in Alberta, and it will be based on local economies and geography. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Langley Aldergrove.
Mr. Speaker, this ideologically driven minister wants to leave our natural resources in the ground, and instead they want to mine Canadian workers' paychecks. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, the last thing Canadian workers need is more inflationary taxation. Will these Liberals get out of the way of our hardworking oil and gas workers, and instead, will they do the right thing? Will they supply the world with clean and ethical Canadian energy?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to quote an extract from an article that the new Director of Communications for the Conservative Party of Canada said, and he said, instead of scoring cheap political points on Trudeau's carbon tax, Conservatives need to get serious and offer their own alternative. I agree with the new Director of Communications for the Conservative Party of Canada, Mr. Speaker.
I know. I know we can't use members' names in the area. Just a reminder that we can't use names. Prime Minister, honourable ministers, those kinds of things. Even if we quote, we can't use it. That's it's a rule that's been around for a while. The honourable member, London Robert.
The honourable member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, the government expects 50,000 people to come into Canada through Roxham Road this year. That's not about to change, according to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. When asked yesterday, he didn't talk about fixing the situation at Roxham Road. Instead, he lectured Canada on having a greater sense of shared responsibility for dealing with asylum seekers. Mr. Speaker, did anyone in government explain to him that being responsible means making sure you're greeting people at border crossings, not on a path in the woods with the cops? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, look, it's our duty to protect Canadians and Quebecers and to provide for border safety and security. At the same time, asylum seekers have to be treated with compassion, and the law has to be enforced in a regular way. The Safe Third Country Agreement is an important tool for managing migration, and we're in constant communication with our U.S. counterparts with regard to the Safe Third Country Agreement. The honourable member for Lac-Saint-Jean. We can see the cooperation is really going smoothly. Mr. Speaker, we see the government's once again taking no for an answer from the Americans. No to suspending and no to updating the Safe Third Country Agreement. They've been saying no since 2017. So it's time to take the next step. The agreement clearly states in Section 10, that the government can unilaterally suspend it. Since it's now clear the Americans aren't going to do anything about Roxham Road, when's the government going to tell them that we are suspending the agreement? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, let's be crystal clear. The closure of that road or suspending the agreement, those are not solutions because they won't solve the problem. As the member opposite knows, Canada shares the longest demilitarized border or unguarded border in the world. Asylum seekers are required to produce identification, and this is an effort to prevent more dangerous crossings. What we are trying to do is modernize or update the agreement.
Mr. Speaker, according to reports in the National Post, the Canadian Armed Forces was warned that the recent inoculation mandate may have been illegal. Mr. Speaker, will this Prime Minister commit to playing divisive politics with our troops and ensure that orders given to our military personnel are legal under Canadian law?
Great question. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. I think we all recognize that
The world has just gone through a global pandemic that has threatened so many lives, including the lives of Canadians. And we as a government had to take every step necessary to ensure that Canadians are safe and protected. That is why we made sure that we invested in vaccinations and got Canadians vaccinated as quickly as possible. That includes our Canadian Armed Force members as well, who took up that responsibility very seriously and made sure that they were inoculated so that they can continue to protect our great country. Thank you very much.
Honourable Member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Mr. Speaker, text messages released to the Public Order Emergency Commission confirm that RCMP Commissioner Lucky sought to use a messaging app that would prevent deleted messages from being retrieved by investigators. I guess she learned a lesson from former Liberal operative Dan Bryan, who recorded explosive audio evidence that exposed the minister's attempt to interfere in a police investigation. The Liberals know they can hide their wrongdoing by using covert apps and deleting evidence, but Canadians are catching on to them. When will the minister and the RCMP commissioner come clean with Canadians and stop the cover-up?
The Honourable Minister of Emergency Preparedness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in this House, speculation, conjecture, and innuendo are not facts. Only facts are facts. That's why perhaps the member opposite has omitted the fact that, for example, when the commissioner asked Commissioner Carrick if I'd been in contact with him, he actually answered, no, that's a fact, Mr. Speaker. And here's another one for the benefit of all members. I never did.
The Honourable Member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Well, I guess we can never know, Mr. Speaker, because they stopped taking recordings of their messages. Text messages released to the Public Order Emergency Commission are confirming a disturbing trend. The Minister of Emergency Preparedness repeatedly politicizing Canada's independent police forces with the complete cooperation of RCMP Commissioner Lucky. Politicizing the deaths of Nova Scotians was just the beginning. Now we learn that the Liberals sought to use independent police forces to provide political cover for their invocation of the Emergencies Act after they had already invoked it. The minister has crossed the line yet again. When will he resign?
The Honourable Minister of Emergency Preparedness.
I think the weakness of the member opposite's argument is solely based on the fact that virtually everything he said is based on conjecture and innuendo. And there are no facts that have contradicted the statements that I have made to this House. I have confirmed to this...
Order. We ask the questions. We should listen to the answers as well. The Honourable Minister of Emergency Preparedness.
Mr. Speaker, it's quite apparent that the members opposite are afraid of the truth. And because it contradicts both their speculation and their innuendo. Mr. Speaker, I have been clear in this House that at no time, Mr. Speaker, did I ever interfere with the conduct and the operations of the RCMP. This has been confirmed by sworn testimony from the RCMP Commissioner. Mr. Speaker, the truth is that this interference never took place. It's a principle that we have always respected and always guarded. It's a foundation.
The Honourable Member for Lac Saint Louis. Mr. Speaker, this week was marked by the visit of the chairperson of the African Union Commission, Moussa Faki Mahamat. Our trade relations with Africa are key, and there are many opportunities on the continent for Canadian companies. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade, Export Promotion, Small Business and Economic Development update this House on the trade situation and how Canada plans to strengthen our ties with Africa? Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for Lac Saint Louis for his hard work. This was the first ever high-level dialogue between Canada and the African Union Commission. And there were many conversations. The relationship between Canada and the African Union is based on shared priorities of peace, democracy, sustainable development, health, and economic cooperation. More than ever, we have to work closely together to ensure the resilience of our economies and that prosperity is shared by all our peoples. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, food bank use is rising by over 20% in Beauce. 1 in 5 people who go to food banks are workers who can no longer make ends meet, whether it's the high cost of food, with pasta, flour, and so on skyrocketing, when will the government realize that Canadians are suffocating under these punishing taxes? Would they? Is it clear now? No new taxes? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for his important question. We're all grappling with this issue, Mr. Speaker, and that's why earlier this year I asked the Competition Bureau to ensure that there was no unfair practices going on in the food industry, and I also requested an investigation into that. I also asked the CEOs of the major grocery stores to do their share for Canadians. They're doing their part, we're doing our part, and I would call on the Conservatives to do their part as well and vote to support Canadian families and to lower prices.
Mr. Speaker, Jan, a mother who lives in my riding, is worried about the carbon tax that now comprises over 64% of her energy consumption. With an ongoing cost of living crisis, already struggling to make ends meet, soon we'll have to choose between food and warmth this winter. Mr. Speaker, will this NDP Liberal government cancel their planned carbon tax increase so hard-working Canadians like Jan doesn't have to choose between eating or heating this winter?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The cost of climate change to Canadians is in the tens of billions of dollars, and it seems like the Conservative Party of Canada doesn't understand that we're all paying for this, that there's no escaping it. And we have to address the issue of climate change as we address issues of affordability, which is why 2 weeks ago, thanks to the Climate Action Incentive payments, a family of 4 received $186 in Ontario, $208 in Manitoba, $275 in Saskatchewan, $269 in Alberta, and they will be receiving this 4 times a year, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Mr. Speaker, based on an email I received yesterday from his Parliamentary Secretary, I understand that the Minister for Public Safety will, for the first time since the Liberals took power in 2015, be initiating a discussion with the RCMP on the subject of putting defibrillators into police cruisers. Wow. Placing defibrillators in cruisers would save over 300 lives a year. That's 30 a month, so time is of the essence. Right. Therefore, when can we expect to learn that a decision has been made, one direction or the other? Thank you.
Great question. I want to thank my colleague for raising this important issue, and I look forward to cooperating with him on it. I have engaged my office to be in touch with the RCMP to ensure that they have all of the tools that they need. And in the meantime, we have continued to make historic investments in frontline officers so that we can ensure consistency of policing excellence right across this country. And again, I underline my gratitude to the member for raising this question. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Malpeque.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Indigenous peoples deserve a justice system that treats them fairly and takes into account their reality. Recently, our government made an important announcement in Manitoba, addressing the overrepresentation and over-incarceration of Métis people in our justice system. Can the Minister of Justice tell us more about his recent announcement concerning the Red River Métis?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
I want to thank the Honourable Member from Malpeque for this question. It's good to see that the tradition of strong representation from Malpeque continues, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, earlier this month we announced a significant investment of $1.68 million to address several issues related to the overrepresentation of Red River Métis people in the justice system. The Manitoba Métis Federation will use this money for programs that will help prevent and reduce crime through diversion of offenders out of the criminal justice system with appropriate supports, and these investments will also help families through the establishment of Métis mediation services. Mr. Speaker, I think everyone in this chamber agrees that we need to fight the overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples in the criminal justice system. This is part of it. Bill C-5 is another.
The Honourable Member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Mr. Speaker, the crisis in our healthcare is getting worse by the day. Emergency rooms across the country are shutting down and are so stretched that families are forced to wait 10 to 20 hours to get emergency care. This cannot continue. The Liberals must act now to protect and expand our healthcare system. When will this government show leadership and invest the necessary funding to ensure Canadians are getting the care they need when they need it.
The Honourable Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. And as you know, the health ministers will be meeting shortly in 2 weeks in Vancouver. We look forward to that meeting as a lot of the issues that the member has raised in terms of particularly how we expand health human resources, how we deal with the kind of health transformation that will get people the most appropriate care in the most appropriate place by the most appropriate provider at the most appropriate time. We're all working together on that, and we look forward to those deliberations.
The Honourable Member for Richmond Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, all of us in our constituency offices are hearing from desperate people affected by illness. All parties agree we need to extend financial assistance to Canadians with serious illnesses. In the last budget, the government announced that sickness benefits would be extended to 26 weeks. This was to be in place by summer or fall of 2022. Unfortunately, it hasn't been done yet. Can the minister tell us when this highly anticipated extended benefit will be available? The Honourable...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And one of the things in which the government has been doing is taking a look at a number of different ways in which we can enhance things such as the EI benefits for Canadians, and also into consideration, we do take into consideration what it is that the member has risen today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And that's all the time we have for question period today. And as I'd like to get going with the daily routine of business, I'm going to ask people to take their conversations outside or just try to be quiet as we proceed. Daily routine of business, tabling of documents.
Introduction of government bills.
Déclaration de ministre. Report interparliamentary delegations. Presenting reports from committees.
Introduction of private members' bills.
First reading of Senate public bills. Motion. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, there have been discussions of...
Order. I want to make sure we're cleared here for a sec. There you go. This after a question period rush that happens. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Speaker, there have been discussions amongst the parties, and if you seek it, I believe you'll find unanimous consent to adopt the following motion: that notwithstanding any standing order, special order, or usual practice of the House, at 4 p.m. on Thursday, November 3, 2022, the Speaker shall interrupt the proceedings to permit the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance to make a statement, followed by a period of up to 10 minutes for questions and comments. After that statement, a member from each recognized opposition party and a member from the Green Party may reply for a period of approximately equivalent to the time taken by the minister's statement, and each statement shall be followed by a period of 10 minutes for questions and comments. After each member has replied, or when no member rises to speak, whichever comes first, the House shall adjourn to the next sitting date.
All those opposed to the honourable member moving the motion will please say nay. Agreed. The House has heard the terms of the motion. All those opposed to the motion will please say nay. The motion is carried. Presenting petitions. Présentation de pétitions. The honourable member for Sandwich Gulf Islands.
Speaker, I rise today to present a petition from constituents, and it relates to the climate crisis. The petitioners point out that Canada signed on to the Paris Agreement, which in its text included a commitment to a just transition for fossil fuel sector workers. This is consistent with Liberal Party platform commitments that have yet been realized. The oil and gas workers, the coal sector workers were promised this kind of economic support to get them through the transition away from dependence on fossil fuels. So the petitioners call on Canada to work with fossil fuel sector workers to create a plan particularly for oil and gas workers, and to follow the recommendations that have been put forward by the government's task force on just transition for Canadian coal power workers and communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting petitions, présentation de pétition, the honourable member for South Okanagan West Kootenay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise to present another petition about the just transition. The petitioners say, whereas Canada must address the climate emergency, they request that the government brings in initiatives that reduce emissions by 60% below 2005 levels, winds down the fossil fuel industry and related infrastructure, ends fossil fuel subsidies, and transitions to a decarbonized economy, creates good green jobs, drives inclusive workforce development, protects and strengthens human rights and workers' rights, expand the social safety net through new income supports, and pays for the transition by increasing tax on the wealthiest in corporations and financing through a public national bank. Thank you.
Presenting petitions, présentation de pétition. Voila. Questions on the order paper. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask that all questions be allowed to stand at this time, please.
Thank you. Orders of the day.
Order émanant du gouvernement, projet de loi émanant du gouvernement commune, resume consideration at second reading of Bill C9, an act to amend the Judges Act.
And when we left off, the honourable member used up a whole 2 minutes of his speech. So that means he's got 8 minutes remaining. The honourable member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think this is something that may have never been happened in the House before. A member begins a speech on a bill in one seat and continues it in a separate seat on the very same day. Made possible by, of course, a standing order change that allows us to sit absolutely anywhere in the House. I was tempted to do it from the Prime Minister's seat, but that would have involved a little too much logistics, and I wasn't sure we'd get back to the debate, so I'll do it from this seat here. Mr. Speaker, we are debating Bill C9, an act to amend the Judges Act, and we are at second reading. I want to say this. I want to talk about the substance of the bill. It's actually, I think, a very good bill, and I'll deal with that in a minute. But first I want to talk about the fact that the government is once again rushing this debate through and imposing closure. And as I consider their action, the thought that occurs to me is that out there in the normal world, there's a saying, your lack of planning does not equal my crisis. But this is the House of Commons of Canada, and as long as they've got the support of the New Democrats, the Liberals can be as disorganized as they want, can create crises for themselves, and then can impose limits on democracy and an open debate in order to rush through crises of their own making. So in the case of this bill, which is now being time allocated, in the case of this bill, the bill was introduced, a version of the bill was introduced as Bill S5, a government bill in the Senate in May 2021. But it died on the order paper because the government, the Prime Minister in his infinite wisdom, decided to call the least necessary election in Canadian history, which resulted in us having exactly the same seat breakdown we had prior to the election. But it did cause everything on the order paper to be wiped off the order paper. And when we resumed in the autumn of 2021, a new bill was introduced on the Senate order paper, and subsequent to that was December 1st, 2021, Bill S3. Subsequently, that bill was dropped, and Bill C9, the bill we are presently debating, found its way onto the order paper on December 16th, 2021. It then sat on the order paper, undebated, for exactly 6 months to the day, till June 16th, 2022. Now, the House rises in time for Saint Jean-Baptiste. So what we know here is, and it's the 24th of June, Monsieur le Président, comme vous...
As you know, this is Saint Jean-Baptiste Day.
Bill, therefore, had a couple of days of time for debate before the House rose. And then, a whole summer going by, it didn't come back until very recently. We've been here for, at this point, a month. So this makes the point. The reason there's a rush, if there's a rush at all, is because the government has caused the delay. And I should point out as well, the purpose of the bill is to make changes to the Judges Act that were implemented in 1971. So we're talking about changes that have been to something that's been in place for 50 years. Saying this constitutes the kind of crisis that warrants putting limits on debate is, in my view, simply unreasonable and simply a reflection of the fact that it is now reflexive with this government to put time limits on all debates on everything. Now let me talk about the substance of the bill. Bill C-9 deals primarily with judges, but as with the provisions it replaces, this new process also applies to persons other than judges who are appointed under an act of Parliament to hold office under what is known as good behavior. And the question of what constitutes good behavior, of course, is a matter that needs to be updated from time to time, particularly in the world of the law and of the actions of judges, because if something goes wrong in the court system, if judges act inappropriately, if courts act inappropriately, we say that the law is brought into disrepute. Bringing the law into disrepute is the worst thing that a judge can do. And of course, what constitutes disrepute does change over time as we get greater sensitivity, for example, to gender issues, which lies at the heart of this particular piece of legislation, concerns relating to the ability of people to communicate with courts who face various forms of disabilities, and so on. So standards within society do change. I think they usually improve, and it is reasonable to update this from time to time. Okay, so right now, the way it works is that should a judge be found to be potentially in breach of their responsibilities, federally appointed judges, I should say, the issue is sent to the Canadian Judicial Council for review. The bill establishes a new process for reviewing allegations of misconduct, allegations that are not serious enough to warrant a judge's removal from office and make changes to the process by which recommendations regarding removal from office can be made to the Minister of Justice. I think I've got only 3 minutes left. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The bill specifically modifies the existing judicial review process by establishing a process for complaints serious enough to warrant removal from office and another for office offenses that could warrant other sanctions such as counseling, continuing education, and reprimands. Now, currently, if misconduct is less serious, a single member of the Canadian Judicial Council holds the initial review and may negotiate with the judge for remedy. I should mention as well the Canadian Judicial Council was set up under the existing law, dates back to 1971, and is mandated to promote the efficiency, uniformity, and improve the quality of judicial services in all superior courts in Canada. The reasons that a judge could be removed from office include infirmity, misconduct, failure in the due execution of judicial office, and, quote, the judge is in a position that a reasonable, fair-minded, and informed observer would consider to be incompatible with the due execution of judicial office. A screening officer can, under the new rules, can dismiss complaints rather than referring them to the review panel should they appear frivolous or improper. Now, certain things, such as a complaint that alleges sexual harassment or discrimination, may not be dismissed. The full screening criteria will be published by the Canadian Judicial Council. These amendments address the current process's shortcomings by imposing mandatory sanctions on a judge when a complaint of misconduct is found to be justified, but not to be serious enough to warrant removal from office. And again, such sanctions could include counseling, continuing education, and reprimands. In the name of transparency, and I see I'm down to 1 minute, this legislation would require that the Canadian Judicial Council include the number of complaints received and how they were resolved in its public annual report, something that I think is a very sound idea. Now, since its inception in 1971, the Canadian Judicial Council has completed inquiries into 8 complaints considered serious enough they would warrant removal from the bench. 4 of them, in fact, did result in recommendations for approval. Now, under the new process, and I'm down to 30 seconds, so I'll just wrap this up here. As laid out in Bill C-9, the Canadian Judicial Council would continue to preside over the judicial complaints process, which would start with a 3-person panel. And if the complaint is serious enough that it might warrant removal from the bench, it could be referred to a separate 5-person hearing panel. I think I'm out of time. I'll just make the observation that I think on the whole this is a good piece of legislation. I'm glad it's before us. It could have been before us earlier, and I very much welcome the opportunity to vote in favour and send this off to committee, but of course I object to the rush we've been put in to do that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
And I agree. You know, it seems that everyone is supporting the passage of the legislation to get to committee. And the Conservative opposition seems to be saying, well, you know, it's the government that sets the agenda, and if they called it more often, then maybe we would have it passed. What they're not indicating is that the opposition, even though we can call the legislation, ultimately it's the opposition that will determine the number of speakers that will cause a legislation to get into committee or not get into committee, unless we bring in time allocation. So by bringing in time allocation, Mr. Speaker, we are finally going to be seeing this legislation go into committee. Many of the stakeholders out there want to get a sense in terms of when the legislation will ultimately get through the House of Commons. And my question is to that effect. Does the member believe, or does the Conservative Party believe, that it could pass this legislation before the end of this year, or are they suggesting that it be 2023 before they will agree to see it pass?
The honourable member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Of there being a rush, I've just cited the Canadian Judicial Council dealt with 8 complaints and dismissed 4 judges over the course of the past half century. So I'm not exactly sure where the rush is, and clearly the government doesn't actually see this as a rush. I mentioned the delays. I'll just ask the Parliamentary Secretary, which of the following is the fault of the opposition? Was it the fact that the bill was introduced before the 2020 election and then the Prime Minister called an election? Was that the result of an action of the opposition? Or was it the fact that they reintroduced the bill in the Senate and then reintroduced it in the House of Commons and then waited for 6 months and didn't bring it forward until the day or 2 days before the House rose for the summer? Was that the opposition's fault? I'm just unclear as to which of these things, which have led to a 1.5-year delay, is the fault of the opposition. Maybe if he gets a chance to get up and speak again, he'll be able to address that question.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like my colleague to expand on something. I rose in this House about a year ago. I presented a motion to have the government put in place an independent commission to investigate problems in the sports culture. Now, maybe this is not executive enough because the different sports federations have to sign up for that voluntarily, so it's not perfect. So it solves part of the problem of this toxic culture in sports. But there are other problems because in 2015, there was also this move to do the same thing in the armed forces. So now we're doing this in the justice sector. So why does my colleague think that it is important, or does he think that it is the creation of an independent committee to deal with complaints? Is that important? I think that is a type of comment rather than a question, but my honourable colleague is correct. He's right. Questions and comments. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd also like to thank my colleague from Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Applauded with great gusto when he completed his first 2 minutes, because they were to be encouraged is that kind of sharing of a moment of a speech given before where he had a 2-week gap between resuming the speech. I don't disagree with a single thing the honourable member said. I like the fact that to be able to thank a Conservative member, because I quite often find myself differing in opinions, if not in respect. But I certainly do not see a single reason why this bill needed to be time allocated. I think everybody understands that it's housekeeping that should have been done a long time ago. We don't see, I mean, it's a spectacular act of malfeasance that brings us this bill, that a judge 2 weeks before his appointment was trading in cocaine with one of his criminal defendant clients. And I ask the honourable member again, what could be the rush?
Honourable member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston, in 35 seconds, please.
I don't think I can't imagine what the rush is. But I just wanted to take the remaining time to say this. I appreciate the kind comments of my honourable colleague, and you know, we've always had good relations. She's had good relations with many people on this side of the House and elsewhere, and that is something to be encouraged. After being here 22 years, I can say that there never was a golden age where we all got along. It's much worse now, but I think we should all strive to get along with each other. We are colleagues. We work together. we should work together. That makes this place a better place. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Resuming debate, the honourable member, the honourable leader of the official opposition. The government House Leader, yes. Thank you.
For me to rise again in this place on behalf of my constituents in Regina Capel to speak to this very important piece of legislation. And again, I find myself following a comment made by the honourable member for Winnipeg North, and I guess I just can't help myself. I'm going to have to address some of the erroneous statements that he made to my colleague from Lanark, Frontenac, Lennox, and Addington. And that's the idea that somehow it's the opposition's fault that government legislation isn't moving through the House. I mean, I've been here for several parliaments now, Mr. Speaker. I have never dealt with a government House team before that has this idea that the opposition is somehow jointly responsible with moving government legislation through the House. He is surprised that members of Parliament from the Conservative Party want to speak to government bills. Well, we all come from diverse backgrounds. We all come from different parts of the country. We all may have constituents in our ridings that have had different experiences with the criminal justice system. And so many of us may want to bring that wisdom, that expertise, that experience that we've had to the floor of this House to make sure that all points of view are heard when we're dealing with something as important as the judicial branch of our government. And so I don't buy the Parliamentary Secretary's argument at all that there is a justification for bringing in time allocation to this bill. There are 338 members of Parliament. We don't expect every single MP to speak to every single bill, but it shouldn't surprise the government that when they bring forward legislation, that members of the opposition party might want to speak to it, might want to highlight areas of the bill that cause concern or pause or flag things that we would maybe invite our colleagues at committee to address. That is part of the normal process. They don't bring us in to the consultation process before they draft the bill. You know, they don't give us a heads up. They don't send over a working title, working document, maybe a shared Google document that our shadow minister could watch and make suggestions and edits. They bring forward a bill, they drop it on the table of the House of Commons, and then we have to go through and study it. And all that takes time, especially when we have our hands full dealing with the waste and corruption that this government continues to push through the government system in many different ways. You know, we are constantly pouring through public accounts to find wasteful spending, and lo and behold, we find them all the time. Just a few weeks ago, we discovered that the government spent $54 million of taxpayers' money on an app that could have been designed in a weekend. Most experts say could have been designed for a fraction of the cost that they ended up billing taxpayers for. And it's a good thing we did go through those accounts in great detail, because you know what we discovered, Mr. Speaker? We discovered that one of the companies that was listed as receiving a payment claims they did no work at all on the app. So, the Parliamentary Secretary might be frustrated that members of Parliament on this side take some time to review with great scrutiny and detail the Liberal legislation, even when there's broad consensus on the need or broad consensus on the objective of the bill. The Parliamentary Secretary will understand why we take out our microscopes, we put our glasses on, we really do a deep dive onto these types of things, because every single time we do, we find more examples of Liberal waste, corruption, and mismanagement. Right. So, back to the bill, Mr. Speaker. It's a straightforward bill in many respects, but you know, it's not terribly big, but I find it awfully heavy. It's laden down with irony, because this bill establishes a process for which office holders, judicial office holders, who engage in misconduct, but that maybe not rise to the level of losing their position, but some type of a disciplinary process for a public office holder. Does that seem ironic to anybody in the House right now? That we have a Prime Minister who's bringing in a mechanism to deal with misconduct and inappropriate behavior? Boy, would I like to see the principle of this bill expanded, Mr. Speaker. Maybe we could expand this so it only doesn't just apply to the judicial branch, but the executive branch of government. Because I would love to see what a behavior review or a review council might do with a prime minister who committed awfully racist acts. I mean, imagine a prime minister, a public office holder, who dressed up in racist costumes, putting on blackface so many times that he lost track of how often he did it. Yep. Imagine what a complaints council or a review tribunal would do with that allegation, Mr. Speaker. How about interfering in a criminal prosecution case? How about leaning on a public prosecutor to try to get a special deal for a very well-connected and very powerful corporation in the Prime Minister's own backyard? What would a complaints process do with that kind of improper allegation? How about the accusations we've heard about bullying and harassment from the Prime Minister's own caucus, driving a female person of color out of the House altogether, forcing her out of politics altogether? She couldn't handle, she no longer wished to cope with the types of treatment that she was subjected to by this Prime Minister. This is a Liberal member of Parliament we're talking about, experiencing that type of offensive behavior from her own leader. I would love to see what a complaints council or a review tribunal would do with that. I sure hope, Mr. Speaker, that our friends on the committee can maybe build some consensus with other political parties and find a way to expand the scope of this bill. And I would just signal to my colleagues in other parties, if that idea is brought forward to committee, to expand the scope of this to include the executive branch, public office holders in the executive branch, the cabinet, the Prime Minister, Conservatives will be there to support those types of amendments at committee, Mr. Speaker. We might even move those amendments. I wonder if the honourable member for Winnipeg North would establish the same principle that he's looking to impose or to establish around the judicial branch. Will he support those efforts to hold all members of cabinet accountable, including the Prime Minister? I would invite him to, maybe he'll have an opportunity during questions and comments and he can inform the House as to whether or not he would be in favor of that. Will he show some consistency when it comes to holding public office holders to the highest level of behavior and conduct? Because if they don't, Mr. Speaker, it'll be rather telling. And if they don't, we'll know why, because we'll know that he's afraid of how that would affect his own political leader. The bill is also important it's significant what's not in the bill, Mr. Speaker. This is a bill that addresses the judicial system in Canada. And anytime a government looks at our criminal code, our criminal justice system, Conservatives eagerly await measures that will strengthen our justice system to protect innocent Canadians and victims of crime. That is something that we are always hopeful will be contained in legislation. Now, unfortunately, the Liberals decided to leave that out of this bill. They would have had lots of opportunities to look at the types of policies that they've enacted in the last few years that have made the situation worse. For example, Mr. Speaker, this government has lowered penalties for some of the most violent types of offenders. They've lowered penalties for people who use firearms in the commissions of certain crimes. As a result of this government's policies over the last 7 years, there is a crime wave going on in many of our large cities and even in rural communities, Mr. Speaker. I represent a riding, the riding of Regina Capel is about 50% urban, about 50% rural. And we hear different concerns about the judicial system, but they both have a relation to the rising crime waves. In the city of Regina, where it's obviously a more urban area, there's all kinds of property crime and theft and personal assaults, and people are very concerned about the rising rates of that. In rural areas, of course, people are concerned about response times and the fact that when they do call 911, when they are a victim of a crime or when a crime is in progress, it can take 15, 20, sometimes 40 minutes for a police officer to respond to the call. And this government, without any consultation to those municipalities, retroactively made changes to the pay system, and they've left the bill for that with municipalities, something I'm hearing a lot from people who live in the rural part of Regina Capel, Mr. Speaker. So Conservatives are eager to discuss this at committee. We are very disappointed that the government, because of their lack of planning and their mismanagement of the House calendar, now have had to bring in time allocation. And we wish there was more in this bill to apply the same types of standards for behavior to the Prime Minister. We understand why they won't do that. They have to protect their political leader. But it does show the hypocrisy that this government has when it comes to rules for everyone else, but not rules for their own leadership, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'll save my comments on a lot of the statements made by the member for a possible opposition day in the future, no doubt, as they like and they thoroughly enjoy the whole concept of character assassination, whether it's the Prime Minister or other ministers. I want to go to the bill itself, and the bill itself is widely respected and being encouraged in terms of its passage from a number of stakeholders. And I would highlight the courts themselves, our Canadian Judicial Council, who would like to see the legislation passed. And if it was not for time allocation, let's not fool anyone. The Conservatives would be playing their games and they wouldn't see this legislation pass. The question that I pose the members, given he's on the House leadership team, is can he give a clear indication? Would the Conservative Party be prepared to see this bill pass through the House of Commons this year, or are they saying to the stakeholders and others that we'll have to wait till 2023, or unless, of course, the government brings in time allocation again?
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, first of all, I have got to respond to the member's erroneous accusation that I was somehow engaged in character assassination of the Prime Minister. Any damage to the Prime Minister's character has been self-inflicted. Nobody on this side told him to dress up in racist blackface. I mean, that is heinous and offensive to all Canadians. He did that all on his own. He bullied members of his own caucus all on his own. And members of his own caucus blew the whistle on that. I mean, only a Liberal would think that when the public hold the Prime Minister to account for his own personal failings, that somehow makes the Prime Minister a victim. The real victims are the people that he offended with his racist acts, the people in his own caucus, the women in his own caucus that he bullied and drove out of public life. Those are the real victims. The Prime Minister is not a victim of character assassination. He's a victim of self-inflicted damage to his own personal credibility.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. L'honorable député de...
The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague talked in his speech about managing the government's legislative agenda, and he criticized them, rightly so. They prorogued and so on. There was a bill yesterday, C-31, that was passed under time allocation. It had money for housing and dental care and so on. But this government thinks that this is a solution to the housing crisis, but it's not. It's a Band-Aid solution. But they also use time-wasting tactics here, and but the Conservatives made us vote on which order of Conservative speakers, what the order was going to be. That was a waste of time, and they got such a laugh out of their procedural tactic. They were snickering amongst themselves about how they were delaying everything. They wasted a whole hour of this House's precious time when we could have been doing something more important. So does my colleague not think that the Conservatives themselves would be better to roll up their sleeves and get down to work? The Honourable Member. Mr. Speaker, I can't think of a better way of wasting the time of this House than the topic the Bloc chose this week for their opposition day on severing ties with the monarchy. We have a situation where Quebecers have a lot of concerns in their daily lives because the value of their money is diminishing. The government has destroyed the value of the money Quebecers worked so hard to earn. And what did the Bloc decide to debate this week? A very philosophical, esoteric topic And is a topic that I think is interesting to talk about after dinner, after a glass of wine. We could talk about the different ways of structuring government, but it's not a reality for Canadians. That's not what they want to see us doing here in this place. Canadians expect members to talk about things like the cost of living, the wasted federal money, crime in our streets, and so on. Those are the things that the Conservatives are talking about and always will here in this place.
All the time we have there. Resuming debate. L'honorable député de Manicouagan.
The honourable member for Manicouagan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak to Bill S-209. Mr. Quebecer, why did I say that? I guess I'm really more focused on Quebec. So, Mr. Speaker, the Bloc will be voting in favor of this. We're not opposed to the bill. And I won't take my full time, Mr. Speaker. Point of order from the Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
You might be referencing a private members' hour bill, so maybe we can just deal with this and then we'll get. Thank you.
Okay, there you go. That's where we're still at. Let me just grab that. Okay, on n'est pas fini.
No, we're not done with Bill C-9 yet.
All right, c'est ça, Matt.
That's right. I understand now. I see what was going wrong there.
Resuming debate. Voila. The House ready for the question. Question as follows. Mr. Lametti, seconded by Mr. Van Dahl, move that Bill C-9, an act to amend the Judges Act, be now read a second time and refer to the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights. If a member of a recognized party present in the House wishes that the motion be carried or carried on division, or wishes the request to be recorded division, I would ask them to rise and indicate it to the chair. The honourable member for Grand Prairie Mackenzie.
We'd request a recorded division.
There you go. Pursuant to made on Thursday, June 23rd, 2022, the division stands deferred until Monday, October 31st, 2022, at the expiry of the time provided for oral questions. Okay. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I suspect if you were to canvass the House, you might find unanimous consent to call it 1:30 at this time, so we could begin private members' hour.
Is it agreed? It's agreed. It's agreed. Accordingly, the House will now proceed to the consideration of private members' business. Par conséquent, la Chambre va remettre.
Accordingly, the House will now proceed to private members' business according to the order listed in today's notice paper. Resuming debate at second reading of Bill S-207, an act to change the name of the electoral district of Châteauguay-Lacolle. Standing in the name of Mrs. Shanahan. There you go, the honourable member for Manicouagan. Mr. Speaker, as you can see, you look over my way, I'm ready to take the floor. So I'll be speaking briefly to this bill today that comes from the Senate. Of course, the Bloc will support this bill so that it can go to committee. But I would like to raise two topics very quickly. The first is the importance of the names we give to federal ridings. It's important in terms of representation because people have to feel included and represented. They have to feel that that the riding name captures them, if you will, that they belong. They need to know who their MP is. They have to understand that there's a link between the geographical area in general and where they live, basically. That's the first thing when it comes to representation. And in fact, that's the whole purpose of this bill, really. And then there's also consultation, because the name of a riding, in order for it to be recognized as being representative of the people who live there, well, obviously you have to consult the people. And there are various ways of consulting when you're a leader, but you need to make sure that the main organizations and stakeholders are in agreement with the name. Personally, Mr. Speaker, from what I've heard, the consultation dimension in this particular case was perhaps lacking. So from the outset, there's a bit of a difficulty. There's a bit of a problem with the legitimacy, if you will, of this bill, given that it would have been beneficial for the bill, like for any bill, to have some prior consultation to make sure that the work being done is really in sync with what the people want. So I said the purpose of this bill was to correct an error, and that is, of course, Châteauguay-Lacolle. Well, Lacolle is not even in the riding of Châteauguay-Lacolle, so that's obviously a mistake. And the name needs to be changed because Lacolle is in the riding of Lac-Saint-Jean. So that's a mistake that needs to be fixed. But when you fix a mistake, you don't want to make a new mistake. And let me just explain, and quite simply, in fact, Jardin de Napierville creates confusion with people within the riding and in the neighboring riding because it's a regional municipality, and the regional municipality, Mr. Speaker, sometimes can be confused. You can confuse different levels of government, federal, provincial, and municipal, including the regional municipalities. Even in my case, so they're the various administrative regions of Quebec. So basically, what the MRC of Roussillon said, I'm paraphrasing that regional municipality, but when you give these places names, you want to create a sense of belonging. And the regional municipality of Roussillon tabled a document raising an issue of potential confusion stemming from this bill and the renaming of the riding of Châteauguay to Châteauguay Jardin de Napierville. So this document was tabled before the Federal Boundaries Commission on October 5th. And the regional municipality's recommendation was, well, first of all, they wanted to express a concern or reservations about the name change and the desire to avoid confusion among people in parts of the regional municipality of Roussillon, which overlaps with the riding. So they want to create a sense of belonging. And so the regional municipality had certain strategic objectives. And so in their view, this name change was going to inhibit the regional municipality's ability to raise its profile and be recognized and so on. So that's part of their submission. And I'm telling you all this, Mr. Speaker, just to bolster the idea that consultation is necessary, and especially consultation with the people who are affected by this type of name change. And my second point, I'll be a bit quicker on this one, because I talked about the submission of the regional municipality of Roussillon. So my second point has to do with the relevance of the bill. I know it comes to us from the Senate, but it now has a sponsor in the House. And the relevance, what I mean by that, is that this is part of the work that's been going on with the redrawing of the federal electoral boundaries. And so there's already a discussion on the table about this exact same issue. So to my mind, Mr. Speaker, I think this is overlap. We're dealing with the same question here as is already being dealt with the ridings boundary commission. And, you know, as members of Parliament, we're also called upon to make proposals and so on. perhaps we could be using our time on something else, another bill that might be more useful and relevant to the riding in question and also for other ridings. So, Mr. Speaker, to sum up, quite simply, I think that on one hand, you have to question the legitimacy of this bill in terms of representation of the public, and secondly, the relevance of it, given that this exact same question is being dealt with by the Riding Boundaries Commission. So the Bloc is not going to stand in the way of this bill, but I did, however, want to mention those comments that may be useful to myself and to all of us in our work here in the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Questions and comments?
Oh, sorry. There is no question comments. I'm sorry. The honourable member for Brampton North. I know.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a privilege to rise on Bill S-207 today. My colleague from Châteauguay-L'École, which is a name that has, I think, defined her in this House for some time now. But the issue that is the concern of this bill is that that doesn't correctly identify the riding and the people that she represents. And I think this is an injustice for any member of Parliament or any representative for there not to be a clear correlation as to who her people are, who she represents. So therefore, I know it was mentioned by the previous speaker in the House that this bill is unnecessary. But I think it's in the eye of the beholder, and it's up to the constituents of Châteauguay-L'École as to whether something is necessary or not, or the member who is sponsoring this bill. I know the Senate has looked at this bill, and they themselves have found that there is legitimacy to having this name change. And there absolutely is. I mean, there's not much to say on this bill, but you can merely look at the map. When you look at the map, you see clearly that L'École is not situated in this riding. It is, however, that Saint Bernard de l'École is situated in the riding. But how insulting is it to constituents when they hear themselves being represented by a particular name? And I think it further emphasizes the fact that, you know, that Ottawa knows best approach. The Commission up here has decided in the last redistribution that this was going to be the name. At that time, the NDP member that was the representative of that riding did not contest the name, and I don't know why. There could have been many reasons to that, and maybe we won't really know why that member didn't take a keen interest in making sure that their voters were identified properly and they knew who their member of parliament was. So that brings us to this point, and we've been at this point several times, Mr. Speaker. This bill has unfortunately had to go through this process several times and hasn't made it to the end. So we've heard debate in this House as to why this is necessary, this change is necessary and important, and we've heard debate regarding this name change in the other place as well. As for the previous speaker saying that it's futile and unnecessary at this point because there's, once again, we're at that 10-year mark where redistribution is happening again, and there are further name changes happening. But I would argue that if it wasn't for the sponsor of this bill, if it wasn't for this member, that would have never happened. It is because of the work that has been done through this private members bill that the Commission has become alerted to the fact that this is very important and we should take names very seriously. I can point to some examples in the redistribution process that are happening currently today as well for Ontario. I know that in my riding of Brampton North, the name of my riding is completely being switched and changed to another name. Just when the constituents were getting used to the fact that these are our boundaries. This is the name we go by. And I would say that the previous Redistribution Commission did a good job at simplifying the names, making it clearly understandable as to where the voters lived and who represented them. But however, again, in this redistribution, the names are being completely switched. And I think it's unfair to voters to constantly be confusing them as to who they need to be going to in a time of need. And that's what we're there for. Oftentimes, when we're not in this House, we are in our ridings, in our constituencies, attending to people's worries, concerns, emergency situations often. And I know for my riding, there's often lots of confusion. And after the last redistribution, there was immense confusion as to where things stood, who they needed to go to. They recalled who they voted for last time and felt that they should be coming to me because my predecessor was the one that I had defeated, and so it just made natural sense. So having a name that can then help constituents imagine what their boundaries may be if they're not in possession of an actual map is important. Currently, like I said, my riding is Brampton North. In this redistribution process, Brampton East is being renamed Brampton North. So Brampton East is no longer existing, and Brampton North is now Brampton East. Brampton North is going to be a different Brampton Chinguzi, apparently. And this is quite confusing. So I know me and my other Brampton colleagues and other presenters at the Commission have made the argument that really, if you're adding a new district, a new constituency, there's no need to change around all of the previous existing names. You just create a new name for the new riding. And so I can really relate to the need for this name change with my colleague. I understand why it's so important for her and for her constituents to be granted this change. I think it is their right to be identified properly, to be acknowledged that they are important within Canada, and that we know who they are and who their concerns are. And they know who to go to when they need change. So this will help clear up a lot of confusion. So I would ask that the members in this House support this bill, regardless of what their personal feelings may be, regardless of whether they feel, there could be a matter that's more important to them that could have been raised. And I know I've heard comments like that made, but this is really important to the voters of Châteauguay-Lécole. And the new name for the riding is Le Jardin de Naperville. So I believe this is what the constituents want, this is what the voters want, and this is what this House should agree to grant them. The residents of St. Bernard de Lécole, among others, communicated these concerns, and they've communicated them before the Commission last time. They've communicated them again this time. It just happens to be that, with private members' bills, this process is can be tedious, can take some time, especially members do not get to choose. And I know a lot of constituents that may be watching at home do not recognize what system we have here in Parliament in order for a member to bring forward a private member's bill. But I think it's important for them to know, because oftentimes I have constituents that come up to me and say, why don't you bring this forward? It would be great if you could have a bill passed under your name that helped the community in some way or another. And, why did this member get to do this? And, why they seem to be working harder than you are on this matter. And so it's important, I think, for constituents to know that it's really hard to get a private member's bill. We have a lottery system that comes up every Parliament. So after every election, there's a new lottery system. There is no preference given to any members as to whether it's something that they've been trying to do for many parliaments and haven't been able to accomplish, or whether it's a new idea. Because we've had new members that just spent a few weeks in Parliament and had to get up and just figure out what private member's bill to bring forward. And so I would say this colleague of mine has spent a long time over 2 parliaments trying to get this to the finish line, and that we respect that. She was able to use her name drawn in the first lottery system for a private member's bill. She was also able to use her the work that she's been able to do with the Senate to get the Senate to recognize this bill and bring it to this House. And so I think we should recognize all the hard work that she has done to almost get this to the finish line, and we should all in this House support this piece of legislation and let the members, let the voters have what they like. Let the voters be represented by who they feel who they are. That is really important, and I don't think any of us would like to be called something that we are not. I would definitely not want to be the member from Mississauga if I was representing Brampton, and we should all, I think, understand that, that feeling. So thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for this opportunity.
Now, I believe we have a point of order from the Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, an agreement could not be reached under the provisions of Standing Order 78.1 or 78.2 with respect to the second reading stage of Bill S5, an act to amend the Canadian Environmental Protection Act 1999 to make related amendments to the Food and Drugs Act and to repeal the Perfluorooctane Sulfonate Virtual Elimination Act. Thank you. Under the provisions of Standing Order 78.3, I give notice that a Minister of the Crown will propose at the next sitting of the House a motion to allot a specific number of days or hours for the consideration and disposal of proceedings at the said stage.
So thank you for that. Je pense que c'est le même.
Is this on the same point of order? The Honourable Member for Joliette. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like your information here. I didn't think that the government could impose a gag during this part of the day.
C'est complètement acceptable.
This is completely acceptable. They can table it. Thank you for standing up, and I thank the Minister for his notice.
Debate, the Honourable Member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's always a privilege and an honor to rise in the House today. And of course, today we're talking about the private member bill, of course, renaming Châteauguay-Lacolle to include Naperville. And I want to talk a little bit about that community and why I actually believe it's important that community get recognized. Of course, they're famous for their fruit and vegetables. They have a beautiful rural countryside and many beautiful things about the countryside there. And so glad to see that as all the great towns and beautiful areas in Quebec get recognized, it should be recognized as well. And just want to talk a little bit about in general, in also my riding is also comprised of a number of areas, and one of them is actually where I live. It's called Clarington. It didn't make it the cut into the name, but it's a beautiful countryside as well, so perhaps a little bit of akin to Naperville in Clarington there, a beautiful rural area. But I did want to talk about because I did hear the block, and I think they had some excellent points. That perhaps there are more poignant things we could be talking about in this House, and so certainly I don't want to be rude in any way. Underscore the wonderful countryside and the beautiful people in Naperville, and for them getting their moment in the sun. And my understanding is that after the redistribution, is that they will as well. And so perhaps, like I said, not the most poignant of PMBs, and so just want to go through some of the things that we can talk about in private members' bills, if the Speaker will give me that little bit of indulgence, because I've had the opportunity to speak. I've had the opportunity to raise a couple of private members' bills in this House. One of which was to give an exemption to propane and natural gas for farmers. Of course, they're paying thousands and thousands of dollars in carbon tax every year. And I'm glad to see we made it through the House, but it fell apart when this government unfortunately called a needless, unnecessary, and very expensive election, but I'm glad to see it's being brought forward by one of our fellow members, one of our Conservative members, the member from Huron-Bruce, if I believe I got it correct, and he will bring, and it's now back in front of the Agriculture Committee. That's Bill, I think, 234, and so that bill will provide tremendous relief. We'll save farmers thousands of dollars. As we know, as in Napierville and elsewhere in Canada, farming is amongst the hardest, yet one of the most important, one of the very most important occupations that we can have. Of course, without farmers, we do not eat. And so one of the ideas that I might throw out is perhaps we could have more private members' bills helping farmers. We are going through an incredible food crisis. This spring will be very, very challenging. And for most people in Canada, it will be okay. For the people in this House who are earning good salaries, it won't be fun to go to the grocery store, but they'll be okay. Who I'm worried about are the people who are economically challenged, not just in Canada, but across the world, where we will see, if the forecasts are correct, some record-breaking starvations. And we've already seen the pain that Canadians are going through right now because of the lack of food production, because of inflation, with 1.47 million Canadians going to food banks in March of 2022. That's a record high. It's never been higher. 20% of Canadians are now going to food banks on a regular basis. 60% of Canadians are failing. 60% of Canadians are failing to put food on their table. These are the type of issues that we need to be discussing. These are the type of issues that will be helping people in rural areas across this country from coast to coast to coast. The other private members' bill that I've had the pleasure to work on, and by the way, the government was good enough to respond to my private members' bill by putting part of it in the budget. But unfortunately, instead of just giving farmers an exemption, the people in Napierville an exemption, what they did is they tried to put in a credit system. The challenges with these debit credit systems that they work, like the carbon tax, is that some of that money always seems to get stuck in Ottawa. Can you imagine that? It's so strange, you know? These millions and millions and millions flow into Ottawa, and they're all supposed to flow out, but somehow they get stuck here in Ottawa. You know, and it's funny because that same money seems to flow pretty easily out to liberal insiders and friends and family, like Arrive Scam, $54 million. We still don't know where that money went. My goodness, like if this was a private sector company, I could just imagine what the NDP would be saying if a private company took $54 million. What the Liberals would be saying if a private company took $54 million and had no idea from people who didn't have even the obligation or the right to pick where that money came from. So. When we need to be looking at this from the angle and from the viewpoint of helping all Canadians going forward, and so that was one of the private members that I had the ability. Another private members bill that I worked on with Senator Alnavar was Bill S-216. That bill helped charities. So that bill, the idea behind that charity, was something that was a barrier. It was called the Canadian problem. It was called direction and control in charitable law. And what that stopped Canadian charities from doing was giving money out and working with other institutions around the world. So once again, you know what the response to this Liberal government was? They put it in their budget. I think I am single-handedly driving a lot of the Liberal policy there, and so they put that in their budget, right? So maybe to this member's credit, maybe me just talking about her private members bill, they will also put that in the budget, right? There's been odder things than that. I think there was some money to go to land control on the moon, I think, in one budget. So and Arrive Scam. So certainly, man, they could put this in the budget as well. But I think that was another good idea of things that we can put into PMBs that will help Canadians from coast to coast to coast. And finally, with respect to my private members' bills that maybe are ideas, we've got the International Human Rights Act, Mr. Speaker. The International Human Rights Act contains a number of clauses, one of which will force the Department of Foreign Affairs to publicize individuals who are being held as prisoners of conscience. These are individuals who are held just because of their beliefs, because they're pursuing things like freedom, liberty, democracy, LGBTQ2 rights, indigenous rights around the world that are being held in their in prisons just because they're pursuing freedom for others. Secondly, it'll also force the government to respond when Magnitsky Act sanctions are put on individuals, or called for, I should say, from a parliamentary committee. So a parliamentary committee says, we need Magnitsky Act sanctions put on this person. Then the Government Department has 40 days to respond. They don't have to do it. They just have to tell us why or why not. It's a very reasonable thing. And the Magnitsky Act schedule, I should go back a half step, or sanctions, are of course those sanctions that the government can put on individuals who are committing the most vile of human rights crimes. And so when the legislation was initially passed, there were many, many instances in Venezuela, in other countries, where these sanctions were put on. However, and in Russia as well. However, these sanctions have stopped being used. And so I'm seeing that, Mr. Speaker, I'm running a little bit short of time, which is a shame, because I could really talk about the people of Châteauguay-Lacour for hours and hours and hours more. This is an absolutely beautiful part of the world. I will say that I did think of another name for the riding, and that was Roxham Road. This has obviously been a serious. This has been a serious issue for Canada, for Quebecers, and so while I say that a little bit in jest, it takes nothing away from the serious issue that I hope the Liberal government will listen and respond to. So what I would say is that j'aime toutes les.
I love the people of Napierville.
Absolutely fabulous time, and look forward to them getting fully recognized as everyone in Canada should be, regardless of what they believe, who they love, or who they are. So.
Reprise du débat.
Resuming debate. I recommend the honourable member for Châteauguay-Lacour. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I am so grateful for the speeches that I heard here today from my colleagues. My colleague from Manicouagan, what a beautiful name. My colleague from Brampton North, good luck with your own redrawing of boundaries. And for my colleague for Northumberland, Peterborough South, you know, I'm an Anglophone, and even that's quite a mouthful. But it doesn't stop the fact that it represents my colleagues' riding. And this is the point of my work here in the House today. I'm very happy to rise in support of S207. It shows that even a proposal for a name change, a necessary name change that is aiming to correct a mistake of the past, as well-intentioned as it might be, this is an error that harmed my constituents 7 years ago. But it still takes a lot of time and effort to correct this error. It doesn't mean it doesn't deserve correcting, and this is because it's important to my constituents. There are other ways to go about this correction, but nonetheless, I am happy to sponsor Bill S207 because it is the result of the work that we've put in since 2015. It brought us to where we are today, and I do have confidence that the name will finally be changed to Châteauguay, Les Jardins de Napierville. Mr. Speaker, As it was already mentioned on several occasions, I'd like to repeat it again for the record. The name Châteauguay-Lacolle is incorrect because the municipality of Lacolle is actually within the riding boundaries of my honorable colleague from Saint-Jean. So for the people of Saint-Jean-Lacolle who live in that county, it's also important that this correction be made. Saint-Bernard-de-Lacolle is the one that's in my riding. Mr. Speaker, during the 2015 elections, many citizens told me that they were unhappy with this name because it was confusing. It also went against their sense of belonging and pride that they had for Saint-Bernard-de-Lacolle. The root of the new name came from the late mayor of Napierville. He had recommended it. Yes, it's the expression that we use for the whole region. This is an agricultural region. It's beautiful. And the name reminds us of that beauty with the Les Jardins, which means the gardens in French. So Les Jardins de Napierville includes all of the municipalities in the RCM. Let's not forget that we're keeping Châteauguay, which is the most populous municipality in my riding, but it's also the valley of the Greater Châteauguay, which includes many municipalities. So this is a really inclusive name that we've come up with. I would like to thank my colleagues who spoke in favor of this bill today. I hope that very soon I'll be able to say to these citizens that they are the citizens of Châteauguay Jardin de Napierville. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
La question est la suivante.
The question is the following. Ms. Shanahan, supported by Mr. Scarpellegia, moves that S-207, an act to change the name of the electoral district of Châteauguay-Lacolle, be now read a second time and refer to the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. If there is a member from a recognized party present in the House, if they would like this to be carried on division or wishes to request a recorded division, I would invite them to rise and indicate it to the chair. Mr. Speaker, I would like to request a recorded division. Accordingly to the recorded division will be reported to Wednesday the 2nd after question period.
It being 1:19, the House stands adjourned until next Monday at 11 a.m. pursuant to Standing Order 24-1.
Let's keep working.
Thank you.